The Colorado winter of 1871 showed no mercy to the weak. Snow had buried the landscape under a pristine white shroud, transforming familiar trails into ghostly paths where a man could lose his way and his life in the span of a single blinding squall. Winds howled through the narrow mountain passes like vengeful spirits carrying ice that cut exposed skin like shards of glass. At the edge of Silver Creek Valley, where the pines stood sentinel against the approaching darkness, a solitary ranch stood defiant against nature's assault. Smoke drifted from its stone chimney, a thin promise of warmth in a world turned cruel and white. Captain Kalen Voss stacked the last of the firewood on the porch, his breath crystallizing before him. At 40, the lines etched into his weathered face told stories of battles fought, both in war and in the unforgiving Colorado wilderness. His right hand, calloused from years of gripping a rifle, instinctively tensed at the sound that carried through the bitter air. A gunshot, distant but unmistakable. Kalen's eyes, gray as winter steel, narrowed as he scanned the tree line. Those eyes had earned him the name Death's Eyes during the war, when Confederate soldiers learned to fear the Union sharpshooter who could take a man's life from distances that seemed impossible. But 8-year-old Finn appeared in the doorway, small for his age, but with the same watchful eyes as his father. Inside, Kalen ordered, his voice low and firm. "Bar the door." The boy disappeared without question, accustomed to obeying his father's commands instantly. Kalen moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving his Winchester rifle from its place beside the door and checking the chamber. Another shot echoed closer this time. Not hunting fire, too erratic, too desperate. He positioned himself at the corner of the porch, rifle ready, as a figure emerged from the tree line. In the moonlight, he could make out a woman staggering through knee-deep snow, clutching something to her chest. Her path wavered each step, seemingly more difficult than the last. "Please," she called out, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "Don't shoot." Blood darkened the front of her coat, frozen black in the moonlight. In her arms, bundled in what appeared to be a thin shawl, lay a small, motionless form. "They're coming," she gasped as she reached the edge of his property. "Please, take my child. Give me a piece of bread. I just want her to live." She collapsed to her knees in the snow, still clutching the bundle to her chest. Kalen moved cautiously forward, rifle still ready, years of combat and frontier life having taught him that desperation could be as dangerous as malice. "Who's after you?" he demanded, scanning the tree line behind her. "My husband," she whispered, teeth chattering violently. "He'll kill us both if he finds us." As Kalen drew closer, he could see the wound in her shoulder, a bullet graze, not deep, but bleeding steadily. The woman's face was young, perhaps mid-20s, but drawn with exhaustion and fear. Her dark hair hung in frozen strands around a face that might have been beautiful in different circumstances. "Please," she repeated, lifting the bundle slightly, "at least take her." The infant's face was alarmingly still, skin tinged with blue. Kalen made his decision, slinging the rifle over his shoulder and lifting both woman and child in one smooth motion. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, like something hollowed out by wind and fear. "Finn," he called as he carried them toward the house. "Heat water and bring bandages." The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the bloodied woman, but he moved quickly, used to his father's terse commands in emergencies. Kalen placed the woman near the fireplace, then gently took the infant from her trembling arms. "How long has she been in the cold?" he asked, unwrapping the child with careful hands. "Hours," the woman whispered, trying to reach for her baby despite her weakness. "Is she's alive?" Kalen confirmed, feeling the faint heartbeat beneath his fingers. "Barely. Working methodically, he removed the infant's wet clothes while instructing Finn to bring warm blankets. The child was tiny, no more than a few weeks old, severely chilled, but still breathing. Kaelin had seen enough death to know the difference between life that was fading and life that was fighting to remain. "My name is Mara," the woman managed through chattering teeth. "She's Eleanor, Nora." "Captain Kaelin Voss," he replied, not looking up from his work, as he wrapped the infant in warm, dry blankets. "This is my son, Finn." Finn returned with bandages and hot water, his movements quick and precise for a child his age. The boy had grown up fast, after his mother's death, learning to be his father's right hand in all things. "You've been shot," Kaelin stated flatly, turning his attention to the wound on Mara's shoulder. "He tried to kill me," she said, wincing as Kaelin began cleaning the injury. "Roy, my husband, he was going to throw Nora out into the snow. Said he'd teach her to be quiet." Her voice broke on the last words, tears finally coming now that she'd reached some measure of safety. Kaelin worked in silence, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. He'd seen this before. Men who returned from war, changed, who brought the violence home when they could no longer contain it. "You're from Silver Creek?" he asked, bandaging the wound with practiced efficiency. She shook her head slightly. "North of here, Lark Ranch." Kaelin's hands stilled momentarily. "Roy Lark, of the Silver Creek Larks." Mara nodded weakly, not missing the recognition in his voice. "You know them by reputation." His tone made clear that reputation was not a favorable one. The Lark family owned half the county, including the largest silver mines in the territory. They were wealthy, powerful, and known for dealing harshly with those who crossed them. "He'll come for me," she whispered. "For Nora." Kaelin finished bandaging her shoulder, then turned his attention back to the infant, who had begun making small, weak sounds, a promising sign. He warmed milk on the stove and brought it to Mara. "Feed your child," he said simply. "I know how to care for infants. Raised Finn alone since he was 2. Mara took the milk with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving Kaelin's face, as if trying to understand why this stranger would help her when her own husband had tried to kill her. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, the weight of her situation settling over her like the heavy snow outside. "Roy will kill us if he finds us." Kaelin moved to the window, checking the darkness beyond. "Rest tonight. We'll talk in the morning." As Mara fed her daughter Finn, silently built up the fire, occasionally glancing at the strangers who had disrupted their isolated existence. When the infant had eaten and fallen into a more peaceful sleep, Mara's own exhaustion finally claimed her. She slumped against the chair, still holding Nora tightly. Kaelin carefully took the child and placed her in a small wooden cradle, one he had carved himself years ago for Finn. Then he covered Mara with a blanket, his movements betraying a gentleness at odds with his weathered exterior. "Pa," Finn whispered, watching his father. "Are they staying?" Kaelin's reply was interrupted by the distant sound of dogs barking. His expression hardened as he moved swiftly to extinguish all but one lamp, plunging the cabin into shadow. "They're tracking her," he said, checking his rifle again. "Get to the cellar." "But Pa—" "Now, Finn." The boy hesitated only a moment before disappearing through the trapdoor in the kitchen floor. Kaelin gently shook Mara awake. "Take your child and go with Finn," he instructed quietly. "Stay silent, no matter what you hear." "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert despite her exhaustion. "Dogs! Tracking party!" Terror flooded her eyes. "If Roy finds me here, he'll kill you too." Kaelin's mouth curved slightly in what might have been a grim smile. "Wouldn't be the first time someone's tried." He helped her to her feet, guiding her toward the cellar. "Whatever happens, don't come up until I call for you." Once they were safely hidden, Kalen moved through the darkened house with the silent precision of a predator, positioning himself near a window, with a clear view of the approach. The barking grew louder, and soon he could make out the flicker of torches through the trees. 3 riders emerged into the clearing before his property dogs straining at their leads. In the torchlight, Kalen recognized the lead rider, Wade Harris, deputy sheriff of Silver Creek. The badge pinned to his coat caught the firelight as he dismounted and approached the gate. "Boss," Harris called out. "Open up. We're looking for a fugitive woman." Kalen waited, watching the men's positions and counting weapons. 3 against 1 weren't odds, he feared, but the legal implications of defying law officers would complicate matters. Finally, he stepped onto the porch rifle held casually but ready. "Deputy Harris," he acknowledged coolly. "It's late for official business." Harris's face was flushed from cold and exertion, his expression a mixture of irritation and wariness. The dogs continued to bark, pulling toward the house. "We're tracking a dangerous criminal," Harris announced. "Mara Lark. She attacked her husband, stole money, and kidnapped their infant daughter. She's armed and unstable." Kalen's expression remained impassive. "Haven't seen anyone." "The dogs tracked her this way," Harris insisted, gesturing to the animals straining at their leashes. "And there's blood in the snow, leading right to your property." "Plenty of wounded game this time of year," Kalen replied. "I shot a doe yesterday, tracked it nearly a mile before finishing it." The dogs continued barking frantically toward the house, undermining his denial. Harris's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Mind if we take a look inside just to be certain?" "I mind," Kalen stated flatly. "My son's sleeping. Unless you have a warrant, deputy, this conversation is over." Harris's hand drifted toward his pistol. "Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense, Captain Voss, even for a war hero." Kalen's stance shifted subtly, a movement so slight most would miss it. But Harris noticed and paused suddenly, remembering who he was threatening. Stories of Captain Kalen, Death's Eyes, Voss's marksmanship were legendary throughout the territory. "If I see anyone matching your description," Kalen said evenly, "I'll inform Sheriff Morgan directly. Now, gentlemen, good night." Harris hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he gestured to his companions. "We'll be back, Voss, with proper papers." Kalen remained on the porch, watching until the riders disappeared back into the trees. Only when the sound of dogs had faded completely did he return inside and open the cellar door. "It's clear," he called softly. Mara emerged first. Nora clutched tightly in her arms, her face pale with fear. "They'll come back, won't they?" "Eventually," Kalen agreed, relighting the lamps. "But not tonight." Finn followed, looking between his father and Mara with curiosity and concern. "You lied to the deputy PA." Kalen's expression softened slightly as he looked at his son. "I did." "Why?" the boy asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Kalen considered the question, then nodded toward Mara and the infant. "Because sometimes protecting the innocent matters more than following the letter of the law." "But they said she's dangerous," Finn persisted. "Those men work for Roy Lark," Kalen explained, guiding Mara back to the chair by the fire. "And Roy Lark is not a man whose word I trust." Mara sank into the chair, exhaustion etched in every line of her body. "I need to tell you the truth," she said quietly. "All of it." Kalen nodded, settling into the chair opposite her, while Finn built the fire higher. "Start from the beginning. My real name is Catherine Sinclair." She began the confession, clearly difficult. "I'm from Boston. My father is Judge William Sinclair of the Massachusetts Circuit Court." Kalen's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing, letting her continue. I met Roy Lark 2 years ago when he came to Boston on business. He was different then. Charming, educated, ambitious. My father disapproved, said the Larks had a reputation even in Boston, but I was 22 and thought I knew better. She glanced down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully now. We eloped. My father disowned me, said I'd made my choice, and would have to live with it. When did things change? Kalen asked quietly. Almost immediately after we arrived in Colorado, she replied, her voice hollow with memory. It was like Roy became a different person. At first it was just anger, impatience. Then drinking. Then she trailed off, but the implication was clear. Kalen had seen it too many times, the way war and frontier life could strip the veneer of civilization from men revealing the darkness beneath. When I became pregnant, he seemed to calm down. I thought having a child might change things. She gave a bitter laugh. Instead, he became convinced the baby wasn't his. Called me terrible things. After Nora was born, the drinking got worse. And tonight, Kalen prompted when she fell silent. Tonight he came home drunk, raging about something that happened at the mine. Nora was crying. He grabbed her from the cradle and said, her voice broke, said he was going to teach her about silence by leaving her in the snow. I tried to stop him, and he hit me. I fell, and when I got up, I grabbed his pistol from the table. He came at me, and it went off. Did you hit him? Kalen asked, his tone professionally detached. She shook her head. No, but in the confusion I took Nora and ran. I just ran without thinking, without taking anything but her. I didn't even have time to grab proper clothes. Kalen was silent for a long moment, weighing her story against what he knew of the Larks. Finally he spoke. The Lark family owns half this county, including Deputy Harris. They won't stop looking for you. He leaned forward, his expression grave. And there's something else you should know. Roy's older brother, John Lark, and I have history. Bad history from during the war. Mara looked up sharply. What kind of history? The kind that ends with one man dead and another carrying the blame, Kalen replied grimly. The Larks have been trying to drive me off this land for years. It sits between their two largest mines. Understanding dawned in her eyes. So by helping me, I've given them exactly the excuse they've been waiting for, he confirmed. But that doesn't change anything. You and your daughter will stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll make a plan. Why would you risk this for strangers? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Kalen was silent for a moment, then looked at Finn, who had been listening intently to the entire conversation. The boy met his father's gaze with unwavering trust. Because there was a time when I needed help and found none, Kalen finally said. And I promised myself I wouldn't be that man, the one who turns away when he could have made a difference. Mara's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Kalen stood uncomfortable with her emotion. You'll take the back bedroom. I'll keep watch. Try to rest. As he turned to go, she caught his sleeve. Captain Voss, what happened between you and John Lark? His expression darkened. That's a story for another time. Rest now. You're safe tonight. But even as he spoke the words, Kalen knew they might be a lie. If Roy Lark was half as dangerous as his brother had been, the arrival of Catherine and her child might have just sealed all their fates. Through the frosted windows, the Colorado night pressed in moonlight, glinting off snow that held the red stain of blood, a stark reminder that in the untamed West, safety was always a temporary condition. A week passed in an uneasy peace. The winter storm that had blown in the night after Catherine's arrival had erased all tracks in the snow and temporarily halted any pursuit. Isolated by massive drifts, the small household settled into a cautious routine. Catherine, who insisted on being called Mara, fearing even the sound of her real name might somehow reach Roy, recovered her strength quickly. Her wound healed cleanly under Kaylin's surprisingly competent care, and Nora thrived in the warmth and safety of the ranch house. Finn, initially wary of the strangers, had become fascinated by the infant. Kaylin often found his son sitting beside the cradle, reading to Nora from one of his books, though Finn's reading skills were still rudimentary at best. "She likes the stories, pup," Finn explained seriously, "even if she doesn't understand the words yet." Kaylin didn't correct him. The boy had been too long without feminine influence, and something in him seemed to bloom in Mara's gentle presence. She taught him to help with Nora, showing patience that reminded Kaylin painfully of Sarah, his late wife. For her part, Mara proved herself useful, insisting on cooking and mending clothes once she was able. Her cooking was terrible at first. The refined daughter of a Boston judge had clearly never prepared meals herself, but she learned quickly and without complaint. On the 7th day, the storm finally broke, leaving a crystalline blue sky and temperatures cold enough to crack tree trunks. Kaylin, who had been making careful preparations throughout the week, announced he would ride into Silver Creek for supplies and information. "Is that safe?" Mara asked, anxiety plain on her face. "Safer than sending someone else," Kaylin replied, checking his rifle before strapping it to his saddle. "And we need to know what's happening." "What if they follow you back?" Finn asked, voicing the fear Mara couldn't bring herself to articulate. Kaylin knelt to his son's level. "That's why I'm going alone. I'll watch my trail." He gripped the boy's shoulder firmly. "While I'm gone, you're the man of the house. Keep the rifle by the door, and remember what I taught you." Finn nodded solemnly, straightening his small shoulders under the weight of responsibility. "Yes, sir." Kaylin turned to Mara. "If I'm not back by nightfall, take the supplies in the cellar and head east through the pine forest. There's an old trapper's cabin 5 miles in. Wait there for 3 days, then continue east to Denver." Mara's face paled, but she nodded. "We'll be ready." The ride to Silver Creek took longer than usual, with Kaylin forced to navigate around massive snowdrifts. The small mining town appeared unchanged at first glance. Saloon doors swinging open and closed, miners trudging between the boarding house and the mines, women hurrying along the boardwalks with baskets of goods. But as Kaylin tied his horse outside the general store, he noticed the flyers nailed to posts and walls. Wanted information on Catherine, Mara, Lark, and infant daughter, reward offered, contact Roy Lark. The accompanying sketch was a reasonable likeness of Mara. Kaylin tore down the nearest flyer and entered the store where Mrs. Halverton, a stern widow who had run the establishment since her husband's death in '65, eyed him with her usual suspicion. "Captain Voss," she acknowledged curtly. "Didn't expect to see anyone from your way after that storm." "Need supplies," he replied simply, handing her his list. As she gathered the items, she spoke without looking at him. "There's been trouble since you were last in town." "Oh, Roy Lark's wife ran off, took their baby. Shot him too, they say." Kaylin kept his expression neutral. "Did she now?" "That's the story." Mrs. Halverton's tone made clear she had her doubts. "Funny thing is, young Mrs. Lark always seemed a gentle sort when she came in. Bruises, though. Always bruises she tried to hide." She fixed Kaylin with a penetrating stare. "You've been keeping to yourself up at that ranch of yours, I expect, during the storm." "As always," he replied evenly. Mrs. Halverton nodded slowly, then lowered her voice. "Sheriff Morgan's been asking questions about you." Said you should come see him if you came to town. Is that so? Kalen paid for his supplies, adding a few extra items to his usual order, including a small rag doll that caught his eye. I'll do that. The sheriff's office was at the far end of the main street, a solid log structure with iron bars on the windows. Sheriff James Morgan was a large man with a bushy gray beard and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice to be easily fooled. He looked up from his desk as Kalen entered, his expression unreadable. "Captain Voss," he greeted, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Figured you might come to town once the weather cleared." "Sheriff," Kalen remained standing. "Heard you wanted to see me." Morgan leaned back, studying him. "Had some visitors from the Lark Ranch few days back. Seemed to think you might be harboring Roy's wife and child." "That's so. Wade Harris was quite insistent that his dogs tracked her to your property." Morgan's gaze was steady. "Said you turned him away." "My land is my land, Sheriff. Without a warrant, Harris had no business there." Morgan nodded slowly. "I understand that position, Captain, but this situation is complicated. Roy Lark has filed formal charges against his wife: attempted murder, kidnapping, theft." "Serious charges," Kalen observed neutrally. "Very serious," Morgan agreed. "And the Larks have the judge's ear. They're pushing for a warrant to search every property between here and Denver. Including mine, I imagine." "Especially yours." Morgan stood, moving to the window to check if anyone was within earshot. Satisfied they were alone, he continued in a lower voice. "I've known Roy Lark since he was a boy. Never did trust him, war hero or not. And I've seen his wife's face when she thought no one was looking." He turned back to Kalen. "I'm not asking if you're hiding them, Voss. But if someone were hypothetically, they'd be wise to get them to Denver as quickly as possible. Judge Thorne there is beyond the Lark's influence and might actually give a fair hearing." Kalen weighed the sheriff's words carefully. "Hypothetically, that would be sound advice." Morgan nodded. "One more thing you should know. Roy is claiming the child isn't his. He's demanding blood tests, that new science they're talking about back east. Is that relevant? It is if his goal isn't really the child, but eliminating a wife who knows too much." Morgan's expression was grim. "There have been rumors about the Lark mines, missing shipments, Mexican gangs. I've been looking into it quiet-like." Kalen absorbed this information silently, piecing together a larger picture. "When is this warrant likely to come through? Judge Hargrove is dragging his feet, got some conscience left apparently, but I'd say no more than 2 days." Morgan moved closer, speaking barely above a whisper now. "If you need to move quickly and don't want to be followed, there's an old mining trail behind the Peterson property. It's not on any maps." Kalen nodded once, understanding the risk Morgan was taking by helping him. "Appreciated, Sheriff." "Don't mention it, really." Morgan returned to his desk. "For the record, Captain Voss came to town for supplies, and we discussed nothing but the weather." Kalen left the sheriff's office with a clearer sense of the danger they faced. The Larks wouldn't stop with legal channels, they had too much at stake. He needed to get Mara and Nora to Denver, to someone who could protect them properly. He was so deep in thought that he almost missed the familiar figure emerging from the saloon across the street. Roy Lark, younger and slighter than his late brother, but with the same cold eyes, stood on the boardwalk, lighting a cigar. He wasn't alone. Samuel Lark, the youngest brother, and 2 men Kalen didn't recognize, flanked him. Kalen ducked into the alley beside the hardware store, watching as Roy surveyed the street. The younger Lark's right arm was in a sling, evidence of Mara's claim that the gun had gone off during their struggle. "We'll leave at first light," Roy was saying to his companions. "Harris swears she's at the Voss Ranch. Once we have the warrant, We'll search every inch of that property." "And if she's not there?" Samuel asked. Roy's smile was cold. "Then we burn it down. Voss has been a thorn in our side too long. It's time we settled old debts." Kalen had heard enough. He slipped back toward the livery stable, collected his horse, and rode out of town by a back route, careful to avoid being seen. The ride back to the ranch seemed interminable, each creak of snow beneath his horse's hooves, a reminder of how little time they had. The afternoon sun had begun its descent by the time he crested the final hill and saw smoke rising from his chimney, a sight both comforting and now threatening. As he approached the house, the door flew open, and Finn ran out face alight with relief. "Pa, you're back!" Kalen dismounted quickly. "Inside, Finn. We need to talk." Mara was by the fire, Nora sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside her. She looked up as they entered, instantly alert to the tension in Kalen's posture. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "The Larks have filed formal charges. They're getting a search warrant probably within 2 days." He began gathering supplies as he spoke. "We need to leave tonight." "Tonight?" Mara stood, moving instinctively toward Nora. "But the snow is our only advantage right now. Roy and his men plan to come at first light with a warrant. If they don't find you, they intend to burn this place to the ground." Finn's eyes widened in alarm. "Our home," Kalen placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "We won't let that happen. We're going to get Mara and Nora to Denver, where they'll be safe. Then we'll come back and deal with whatever comes next." "What's in Denver?" Mara asked, already moving to collect the few belongings she and Nora had. "Judge Thorne. He's fair beyond the Larks' influence. Sheriff Morgan thinks he might give you a proper hearing." Kalen pulled out a map, spreading it on the table. "There's an old mining trail we can take that should keep us off the main roads." Finn tugged at his father's sleeve. "Can I come too, Pa? I don't want to stay here alone." Kalen knelt, meeting his son's eyes. "You have to come. I need you to help with the horses and watch our back trail. You're my scout, remember?" The boy nodded solemnly, fear giving way to determination at being given an important role. Kalen ruffled his hair, then turned back to the preparations. "We'll take the wagon as far as we can, then switch to horseback if necessary. Pack only what we need to survive: food, blankets, weapons." As they worked, Kalen described what he'd learned in town: the wanted posters, the rumors about the Lark mines, Sheriff Morgan's veiled warning. "Roy is claiming Nora isn't his," he told Mara as they loaded the wagon. "He's demanding blood tests." Mara froze, something like panic flashing across her face before she controlled it. That's absurd." Kalen noted her reaction but didn't press. Everyone had secrets, and hers were her own unless they affected their survival. By dusk, they were ready. The wagon was packed, the house secured as well as possible. Kalen had hidden their most valuable possessions in a secret compartment beneath the floorboards, a precaution he'd taken years ago against exactly this kind of threat. "If they burn it, they burn it," he said, looking around the home he'd built with his own hands. "It's just wood. We can rebuild." Mara touched his arm gently. "I'm so sorry to bring this trouble to you and Finn." "The trouble was already coming," he replied, checking his pistol before tucking it into his belt. "You just gave them an excuse to hurry it along." As they prepared to depart, Finn carried Nora to the wagon, carefully nestled in blankets. The boy had taken his responsibility as protector seriously, barely letting the infant out of his sight. "Pa will keep us safe," he whispered to her. "He was a war hero, the best shot in the whole Union Army." Kalen heard his son's words and felt the weight of that faith like a physical burden. He had failed to protect Sarah when the fever took her. He had promised himself never to fail again, especially not his son. Just as they were about to leave, the sound of approaching horses broke the twilight silence. Kalen tensed, rifle immediately in hand. "Get in the cellar," he ordered Mara. "Take the children." "Kalen, now." As they disappeared through the trap door, Kalen moved to the window, counting riders in the fading light. Not 2 or 3 this time, but at least 10 mounted men approaching his property, torches aloft in the gathering darkness. At their head rode Samuel Lark, his face visible in the torchlight. Beside him, the unmistakable figure of Roy Lark sat straight in the saddle despite his injured arm. They had come a day early, without a warrant, and with far more men than any legal search would require. This wasn't law. This was a raiding party. Kalen checked his ammunition and positioned himself by the door. If the Larks wanted a war, Captain Death's Eyes Voss would remind them why soldiers on both sides had learned to fear his name. The riders halted at the edge of Kalen's property, torches casting long, menacing shadows across the pristine snow. Samuel Lark raised his hand, signaling the others to wait as he and Roy approached the fence line. "Voss," Samuel's voice carried clearly through the cold air, "come out and face us like a man." Kalen remained by the window, counting weapons. Most carried rifles, and all likely had sidearms. The odds were poor, but he'd faced worse during the war. The real concern was the children and Mara hidden in the cellar beneath his feet. "What business brings the Larks to my property after dark?" Kalen called back, his voice betraying none of his tension. "And with such substantial company." Roy urged his horse forward, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "You know damn well why we're here, Voss. Hand over my wife and child, and we might let you keep your miserable life." "I see no warrant, Lark," Kalen replied evenly. "This is private property. Turn around and come back with the sheriff and proper papers if you have legitimate business." Samuel laughed, the sound sharp in the cold air. "We don't need papers to reclaim stolen property or apprehend criminals. Catherine Lark is wanted for attempted murder. The law's on our side." "Then bring the law," Kalen countered. "Not a gang of hired guns." Roy's patience snapped. "Enough, we know she's here. The tracks led straight to your door before the storm hit." "You've been misinformed." Kalen shifted position, ensuring he remained partially concealed while keeping both brothers in view. "I haven't seen your wife, Lark. Now take your men and leave my property." For a moment, it seemed Roy might order an immediate attack. His hand moved toward his holster, and several of the men behind him tensed in anticipation. But Samuel placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm, leaning close to whisper something in his ear. Roy's expression darkened further, but he nodded reluctantly. "This isn't over, Voss," he called. "We'll be back at dawn with the sheriff and a warrant. If we find you've been lying, well, accidents happen on the frontier all the time." "I'm aware," Kalen replied coldly. "I've seen many men die from poor decisions, like charging onto another man's land, armed and threatening." The implied threat hung in the air between them. For all his bluster, Roy Lark knew the stories about Captain Voss's marksmanship were not exaggerations. Starting a gunfight with him, especially on his own ground, would mean casualties on their side, perhaps including the Lark brothers themselves. "Dawn, Voss," Samuel repeated. "Be smart about this. The Larks always collect their debts." With that, they wheeled their horses around and retreated, torchlight receding into the darkness. Kalen watched until they disappeared from sight, then quickly moved to the cellar door. "They're gone," he called softly, lifting the trap door. But not for long. Mara emerged first. Nora clutched tightly in her arms, her face ashen. "They found us. They suspect but don't know for certain. Kalen turned to Finn, who climbed out, looking more determined than frightened. We need to move quickly. They'll be back at first light with official support. How did they know to come early? Mara asked gently, rocking Nora, who had begun to whimper. Someone in town must have seen me and reported back. Kalen resumed loading supplies into the wagon with renewed urgency. We've lost our head start, but we still have darkness on our side. They worked swiftly, speaking little. Within half an hour, the wagon was packed, the horses harnessed, and the house secured as well as time allowed. Kalen lifted Finn onto the wagon seat, then helped Mara up beside him, Nora now bundled securely against the cold. Stay on the seat with Finn, he instructed. I'll lead on horseback to watch for trouble. As Mara settled beside Finn, the boy instinctively moved closer to her, his small face set with the same determined expression his father often wore. Despite everything, Mara felt a surge of affection for this solemn child who had accepted her and Nora without question. We'll be all right, she told him softly. Your father knows what he's doing. Finn nodded, gripping the reins as Kalen had taught him. Pa's the best shot in Colorado territory. Roy Lark should be scared of him, not the other way around. Kalen mounted his stallion, a powerful roan he called Sergeant, and led them away from the ranch house by a back trail. Instead of taking the main road toward Silver Creek, they headed east into the dense pine forest that bordered his property. The going was slow and treacherous. Though the moon provided some light, the forest trail was narrow and drifted with snow. The wagon creaked ominously as it navigated the uneven terrain, and more than once Kalen had to dismount to help guide the horses through particularly difficult passages. This doesn't look like a trail to Denver, Mara observed after they had been traveling for nearly 2 hours. It's not yet, Kalen replied, voice low. We're taking Morgan's suggestion, an old mining path that connects to the Denver road further east. It's not on any maps the Larks would have. They pressed on through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or tend to Nora's needs. The temperature dropped steadily, their breath crystallizing before them. Finn eventually dozed off against Mara's shoulder exhaustion, overcoming even his determination to remain vigilant. As dawn approached, they reached a small clearing where the remains of an old mining operation stood, abandoned, collapsed wooden structures, partially reclaimed by the forest. Kalen signaled for them to stop. We'll rest here briefly, he decided, helping Mara down from the wagon. The horses need it, and so do you. What about the Larks? Mara asked gently, transferring the sleeping Finn to a bedroll inside the wagon cover. By now they've discovered we're gone. They'll be tracking us, but the fresh snow last night should have covered our immediate trail. Kalen began building a small, nearly smokeless fire using techniques he'd learned during the war. We have maybe 2 hours before we need to move again. As the fire's modest warmth began to dispel some of the biting cold, Mara settled beside it, cradling Nora. Kalen produced some jerky and hardtack from his supplies, offering them to her along with a canteen of water. It's not much, he apologized. It's more than I expected yesterday, she replied, accepting the food gratefully. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the woods around them gradually lightening with pre-dawn gray. Finally, Mara spoke again, her voice hesitant. You said you and John Lark had history, from the war. Kalen's expression hardened slightly, but he nodded. We served in the same regiment, 5th Colorado Infantry. Was he, like, Roy? Worse, Kalen replied flatly. John Lark was a butcher who enjoyed his work too much. When the fighting was official against armed Confederates, I could stomach it. But toward the end, he trailed off, staring into the small flames. Mara waited, sensing he needed to tell this story as much as she needed to hear it. There was a village, he finally continued. Southern sympathizers, they said, but it was mostly women and children. Old men. John was a captain then, outranked me. He ordered us to make an example of them. The muscles in Kalen's jaw tightened. I refused, said I'd report him if he pursued it. There was a confrontation. His pistol was drawn. In the struggle, it went off. You killed him, Mara asked quietly. Kalen's eyes met hers. That's what the official report says. Self-defense during a dispute over orders. But the truth is more complicated. What do you mean? I wasn't the only one who objected to John's order. Wade Harris, the deputy who came to my ranch, he was there too. He and John were friends from before the war, joined up together. Kalen paused, checking to ensure Finn was still asleep in the wagon before continuing. When John pulled his gun on me, Wade tried to intervene. In the struggle, Wade's rifle discharged. The bullet hit John. But Wade panicked, said he couldn't be responsible. He had a girl waiting back home, Sarah, who later became my wife. Mara's eyes widened. Your wife was engaged to Wade Harris. Not officially, but they had an understanding before the war. When we returned to Silver Creek, Wade couldn't face what he'd done. He started drinking, couldn't look Sarah in the eye. I was the one who helped her when her father died that winter. We married the next spring. And Wade never told the truth about John's death. Never publicly admitted it. Let everyone believe Captain Voss had killed John Lark in self-defense. Kalen's expression was grim. The Lark family never accepted the ruling. They've been waiting for a chance at revenge ever since. Mara absorbed this in silence, the pieces falling into place. That's why you were so quick to help us. You already knew what the Larks were capable of. I knew, Kalen agreed quietly. And I recognized the look in your eyes when you arrived. It's the same look I've seen in my own mirror many mornings. The sound of Nora stirring interrupted them. As Mara adjusted her daughter's blankets, Kalen rose to check their surroundings, his posture alert. We should move soon, he said. I don't like being in one place too long. Just as he spoke, a distant crack echoed through the trees, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under weight. Kalen's rifle was in his hands, instantly, his body shifting to place himself between the sound and his companions. Wake Finn, he ordered softly. Get in the wagon and be ready to move. Mara quickly roused the boy, who came alert with the same instant readiness his father displayed. As they prepared to depart, Kalen melted into the tree line, moving silently despite the snow. Minutes passed in tense silence. Mara and Finn waited in the wagon, Finn now holding the reins, while Mara kept Nora close, one hand resting on the small pistol Kalen had given her days earlier. Finally, Kalen reappeared, his expression slightly relieved. Just a deer, but we've lingered too long. Let's move. They continued their journey as the sun crested the eastern mountains, casting long blue shadows across the snow. The old mining trail gradually widened, showing signs of more recent use, until it eventually joined a larger road that Kalen identified as the eastern approach to Denver. We're making good time, he told them, riding alongside the wagon now that they were on better terrain. If we push hard, we could reach the outskirts of Denver by nightfall tomorrow. Finn, fully awake now, and once again taking his role as wagon driver, seriously frowned at his father. What about the ranch, Pa? If the Larks come back and we're not there, buildings can be rebuilt, son, Kalen replied gently. Land remains. What matters now is keeping everyone safe. They traveled steadily through the morning, the terrain gradually changing from dense forest to more open country. By midday, they had reached a point where the road descended into a broad valley offering a clear view for miles around. Kalen called a halt at the top of the ridge, scanning the landscape with experienced eyes. We'll rest the horses again here. Good visibility in all directions. As they stopped, Mara climbed down stiffly from the wagon, her body aching from the cold and constant motion. Despite her exhaustion, she insisted on helping Kaelin tend to the horses while Finn watched over Nora. "You're good with them," Kaelin observed as she confidently stroked the lead horse's neck, calming the tired animal. "My grandfather raised horses outside Boston," she replied with a small smile, "before father became a judge and decided we needed to live in the city to maintain appearances." "You miss it the East." Mara considered this as she worked. "I miss certain things, hot baths, libraries, knowing your neighbors won't shoot you over a property dispute." Her smile turned wry. "But there's a restrictiveness there, too. Everyone watching, judging, measuring your worth by your family name and connections." "And out here?" Kaelin asked, genuinely curious. "Out here there's a rawness that's both terrifying and exhilarating." She glanced at him. "Men like Roy exploit it for power. But men like you use it to build something real." Kaelin seemed momentarily disarmed by her assessment, unused to such direct personal observations. Before he could respond, Finn called from his position as lookout. "Paw riders coming from the west." Kaelin was instantly alert, moving to where Finn stood pointing. In the distance, barely visible against the white landscape, several dark figures on horseback were moving steadily in their direction. "Could be regular travelers," Mara suggested hopefully. "Could be," Kaelin agreed, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "But we won't wait to find out. Back in the wagon quickly." They resumed their journey with new urgency, Kaelin pushing the horses harder than before. The road began to descend into the valley, winding between rocky outcroppings that offered both cover and potential ambush points. "If it is the Larks, how did they find us so quickly?" Mara asked, anxiety evident in her voice as she clutched Nora close. "They know these lands better than most," Kaelin replied grimly. "And they have resources, men who can be positioned at key crossroads, scouts who know every trail." As they rounded a sharp bend in the road, Kaelin suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. Ahead, a fallen tree blocked their path, too large for the wagon to navigate around on the narrow road. "Pa," Finn's voice held a note of worry. Kaelin studied the obstacle with narrowed eyes. "That didn't fall naturally. The cut is too clean." As if confirming his suspicion, the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley, and a bullet splintered the wood of the wagon just inches from where Mara sat. She gasped instinctively, curling her body around Nora. "Get down," Kaelin ordered, already sliding from his horse and drawing his rifle. "Finn, take the reins and be ready to move on my signal." Another shot rang out, this one kicking up snow near Sergeant's hooves. The big horse reared slightly, but didn't bolt, trained to withstand the sounds of battle. Kaelin tracked the source of the shots to a rocky outcropping about 200 yards up the slope. Without hesitation, he raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. A cry of pain rewarded his accuracy, followed by the sound of a body tumbling down rock. "There are at least 3 more," he called to Mara and Finn, moving to use the wagon for cover. "When I give the word Finn, you drive straight for that fallen tree. Don't stop, just crash through it if you have to." "But Pa, trust me, son. That tree was cut recently. It's not fully settled. The horses can break through." Finn swallowed hard, but nodded, gathering the reins tightly in his small hands. Kaelin turned to Mara. "Keep your head down and that pistol ready. If anyone gets close to the wagon, don't hesitate." Without waiting for her response, he fired again at the rocks, forcing their attackers to keep their heads down. Then, using the distraction, he sprinted to a position 30 yards ahead, diving behind a boulder just as more shots peppered the ground around him. From his new vantage point, Kaelin could make out at least 2 more gunmen on the ridge. Neither wore the distinctive clothing of the Lark ranch hands, appearing instead to be typical frontier roughnecks, hired guns rather than loyal employees. Taking careful aim, Kalen fired twice in rapid succession. One bullet struck rock near the closest shooter, sending stone fragments into the man's face. The other found its mark in the shoulder of the second gunman, who dropped his rifle with a howl of pain. "Now, Finn!" Kalen shouted. "Go!" Finn slapped the reins hard, and the wagon lurched forward, gaining speed as it headed directly for the fallen tree. Mara held Nora tightly with one arm, the pistol ready in her free hand, as they bounced violently over the uneven ground. The horses, sensing freedom ahead, needed little encouragement. They hit the tree at full gallop, the lead animal leaping over the thinner upper branches, while the wagon crashed through the main trunk with a splintering crack. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the wagon might overturn as it tilted precariously to one side. Then it righted itself with a bone-jarring thud, and they were through, continuing down the road at a dangerous pace. Kalen provided covering fire for a few more seconds, then mounted Sergeant and galloped after them, catching up just as they reached a bend that would take them out of the ambushers' line of sight. "Keep going," he ordered, falling in beside the wagon. "We need distance." They pushed on for another mile before Kalen finally signaled them to slow to a more sustainable pace. The horses were lathered with sweat, despite the cold, their breath coming in great steaming clouds. "Were those Roy's men?" Mara asked, once they were sure they weren't being pursued. Kalen shook his head. "Hired guns. Local toughs by the look of them, not skilled enough for a proper ambush." "But they knew we were coming this way," Finn pointed out, still gripping the reins tightly. "Yes," Kalen agreed, his expression troubled. "Which means either we were spotted leaving or someone knew our route in advance." Mara finished the implication clear. "Sheriff Morgan is the only one who knew we might take this trail." Kalen's face hardened. "I've known him for years. I can't believe he'd betray us." "Maybe he didn't have a choice," Mara suggested. "If the Larks threatened him or his family—" Kalen considered this possibility, then shook his head again. "Morgan's no coward, and his wife Clara is tougher than most men I know." They continued in troubled silence, the incident having shattered any sense of security they might have felt. If their route had been compromised, nowhere was truly safe. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they reached a small settlement, little more than a trading post stables, and a rough tavern that served as hotel for the occasional traveler. Kalen surveyed it cautiously before approaching. "We need fresh horses," he decided. "And information. If the Larks have men watching the roads, we should know about it." "Is it safe to stop?" Mara asked, eyeing the weathered buildings warily. "Safer than pushing exhausted horses through the night." Kalen transferred his rifle to a more accessible position. "Stay in the wagon with the children. I'll arrange for rooms and new horses." The trading post owner, a grizzled man named Peterson, recognized Kalen immediately. "Captain Voss didn't expect to see you this far east. Trouble at the ranch." "Just business in Denver," Kalen replied smoothly. "Need fresh horses for the wagon, and rooms for the night if you have them." Peterson's eyes drifted to the wagon, noting Mara and the children. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he asked no questions. "Got 2 rooms available, and I can have fresh horses ready by morning." As they conducted their business, Kalen casually inquired about other travelers on the road. Peterson scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Had a group come through yesterday heading west. Rough sorts. Asked about the trails to Silver Creek." His eyes narrowed. "One mentioned your name, come to think of it. Asked if you ever came this way." "What did you tell him?" "Told him I mind my own business and suggest others do the same." Peterson spat tobacco juice into a nearby can. Don't much care for men who ask too many questions about my customers. Kalen nodded his appreciation. Seen any law around sheriff or deputies? Had a telegram for the Silver Creek Deputy Harris, I think his name is. Said he'd be coming through with papers. Official business. Peterson shrugged. Haven't seen him yet, though. This news confirmed Kalen's fears. The Larks were mobilizing all their resources, including their influence over local law enforcement. Soon, they would have official papers that would make helping Mara and Nora a crime in the eyes of the law. After securing the rooms and arranging for the horses, Kalen helped his exhausted companions inside. The accommodations were sparse but clean, 2 small rooms above the trading post connected by a shared balcony. You and Nora take that room, Kalen told Mara. Finn and I will take this one. Try to rest. I'll keep watch. Finn was asleep almost before his head touched the thin pillow, the day's excitement having drained his young reserves. Kalen covered him with an extra blanket, then moved to the window, positioning himself where he could observe both the road and the stables. A soft knock at the door pulled his attention away. Opening it cautiously, rifle ready, he found Mara standing there, Nora sleeping peacefully in her arms. I was wondering, she began hesitantly, if we might talk. Kalen stepped aside to let her enter, checking once more that Finn was deeply asleep before closing the door. What is it? Mara settled into the room's only chair, adjusting Nora's blankets nervously. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have explained before you risked so much for us. Kalen leaned against the wall, waiting silently. Roy was right about one thing, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Nora isn't his child. Kalen's expression remained neutral, though his eyes sharpened with interest. I suspected as much from your reaction when I mentioned his demand for blood tests. You're not surprised? Mara asked, looking up at him. I've seen enough of life to know things are rarely simple. He nodded toward the sleeping infant. Whose child is she? Mara took a deep breath. John Lark's. The statement hung in the air between them, its implications expanding like ripples in still water. Kalen straightened slightly, reassessing everything in light of this revelation. John died over a year ago, he said finally. Mara nodded. We met in Boston before I knew Roy. John was there on business for the family mines. He was different then, charming, educated, nothing like the man you described from the war. Men often show different faces to different people, Kalen observed without judgment. We were together briefly. Then he returned west, promised to send for me. Her hands tightened protectively around Nora. I never heard from him again. Later, I learned he had died in some dispute during the war. When Roy came to Boston months later, I had no idea they were brothers at first. He looked so different. And by the time you discovered the connection, you were already committed, Kalen surmised. Yes, Roy courted me intensely. I was lost after John. Alone. My father had made it clear he considered my behavior with John shameful. Mara's voice caught. When Roy proposed, it seemed like fate giving me a second chance. A connection to John, even if once removed. When did Roy discover the truth? I don't think he knows for certain, but he began to suspect after Nora was born. She has John's eyes, his chin. Mara looked down at her daughter with a mixture of love and fear. If Roy confirms his suspicions with these blood tests, he'll use it to destroy you, Kalen finished grimly. And possibly Nora as well. Mara nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid. Afraid you might not help us if you knew. Kalen was silent for a long moment, processing this new information and its implications. Finally, he moved from the wall to kneel beside her chair, his face level with hers. Listen to me, Mara. What happened between you and John Lark happened before I met you, before I made a promise to help you and your child. His voice was steady, certain. That promise doesn't change because of who Nora's father was. Relief flooded Mara's face, tears spilling over. Thank you, she whispered, for understanding. Rest now, Kaylin said, rising. Tomorrow will be another long day. As Mara returned to her room with Nora, Kaylin resumed his position by the window, his mind working through this new complication. John Lark's daughter. The irony might have amused him under different circumstances. The sound of approaching horses drew his attention back to the road. Through the gathering darkness, he could make out 3 riders approaching the trading post at a steady pace. As they drew nearer, the moonlight revealed the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest. Deputy Wade Harris had arrived, and from the official-looking document case attached to his saddle, he had the warrant they'd been dreading. Their time had just run out. Kaylin moved quickly, gathering their meager belongings, while keeping one eye on the 3 riders dismounting outside. Through the frosted window, he could clearly identify Wade Harris's distinctive slouched posture as the deputy handed his reins to one of his companions. Mara, he called softly, rapping his knuckles on the connecting door. We need to move. Now. She appeared almost instantly, Nora already bundled and ready. One look at Kaylin's expression told her everything she needed to know. Harris, she whispered. Kaylin nodded grimly. And he's got papers. Wake Finn while I check the back exit. The trading post's rear staircase led directly to the stables, a common design in frontier establishments where quick departures were often necessary. Kaylin descended silently, Winchester in hand, listening to the muffled voices from the main room where Peterson was presumably greeting the new arrivals. The stable was dark and quiet, their exhausted horses still in their stalls alongside 2 fresh ones Peterson had promised for morning. Kaylin quickly assessed their options. The wagon would be too slow and conspicuous now. They'd have to ride double and travel light. He returned upstairs to find Finn fully awake and helping Mara gather the last of their supplies. We'll take the horses, he informed them quietly. Finn will ride with me, Mara, and Nora on the second mount. Essential supplies only. What about the warrant? Mara asked, securing Nora to her chest with a makeshift sling. It's only valid if they find us, Kaylin replied, checking his ammunition. And I don't intend to make that easy for them. From below came the sound of Peterson's gruff voice, followed by Harris's more strident tones. Though the words were indistinct, the increasing volume suggested an argument. Peterson's buying us time, Kaylin realized. Let's not waste it. They slipped down to the stables, Kaylin leading the way with Finn close behind. The boy moved with the same silent precision as his father, a skill learned through countless hunting trips in the Colorado wilderness. Saddling the horses took precious minutes, each creak of leather seeming unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Just as they finished, the door connecting the stable to the trading post swung open, spilling lamplight across the straw-covered floor. I'm telling you, Peterson, I saw fresh tracks leading to your place, Harris was saying as he entered, and that wagon outside matches the description. He froze upon seeing Kaylin and the others, hand instinctively moving toward his holster. Behind him, Peterson's weathered face registered brief surprise, then resignation. Sorry, Voss, the old trader muttered. Couldn't stall him any longer. For a moment, no one moved. Harris's eyes darted from Kaylin to Mara, then to the children. Something like genuine regret flickered across his features before his expression hardened. Captain Voss, he said formally, I have a warrant for the arrest of Catherine Lark on charges of attempted murder, kidnapping, and theft. Step aside. Kalen remained motionless, rifle held casually but ready. Let's not do this, Wade. You know what Roy Lark is, what he's capable of. I know my duty, Harris replied stiffly. And I know you're harboring a fugitive. She's not what Roy claims, Kalen countered. She was fleeing for her life, and her child's. Harris's jaw tightened. That's for a court to decide, not you. His eyes shifted to Mara. Mrs. Lark, please come with me. I'll ensure your safety until the trial. Mara clutched Nora closer. You work for the Larks. You can't ensure anything. I work for the law, Harris insisted, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Like you did during the war, Kalen asked quietly, when you let me take the blame for John Lark's death. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Harris paled visibly, his hand frozen halfway to his holster. That was different, he managed finally. Was it? Kalen took a calculated step forward. You've been the Larks' man ever since Wade, carrying their water, enforcing their will, calling it the law. You don't understand, Harris hissed, glancing nervously toward the door where his companions might appear any moment. The Larks own half the county. Cross them and you're finished. They don't own me, Kalen stated flatly. And they don't own Sheriff Morgan either, do they? Where is he, Wade? Why isn't he here serving this warrant himself? A flush crept up Harris's neck. Morgan's indisposed. What did you do to him? Mara demanded, speaking the fear Kalen hadn't voiced. Nothing, Harris protested. He's just being held for questioning. Judge Hargrove felt he might be compromised in this case. Kalen's eyes narrowed. Hargrove, another man in the Lark's pocket. Enough talking, Harris declared, seeming to find his resolve. He drew his pistol, though he kept it pointed at the ground. Mrs. Lark comes with me. Now, the rest of you can go free. I'll tell Roy you were already gone when we arrived. Kalen assessed the situation with the cold calculation of a veteran soldier. Harris was alone for the moment, but his companions would come looking soon. The deputy was visibly uncomfortable with the confrontation, his hand not quite steady on his weapon. There's another way, Wade, Kalen said, his voice dropping to a more conversational tone. You could help us. Make things right after all these years. Harris barked a bitter laugh. Help you against the Larks. That's suicide. Is living as their puppet any better? Kalen countered. How long before Roy decides you know too much? You've seen what happened to others who crossed them. Uncertainty flickered in Harris's eyes. What are you suggesting? Let us pass. Tell your men we slipped out before you arrived. Kalen nodded toward the rear stable doors. We're heading to Denver to Judge Thorne. He's beyond the Lark's influence. He can give Mara a fair hearing. And leave me to face Roy's wrath. Harris shook his head. He'd know I let you go. Then come with us, Mara suggested suddenly. Testify about what the Larks have done to me to others. Help us bring them to justice. Harris stared at her, clearly torn. For a moment, it seemed he might actually consider their offer. Then the sound of approaching footsteps from the trading post hardened his expression. Too late, he muttered, raising his pistol to cover them. Don't make this worse, Voss. I don't want to shoot you in front of your boy. Kalen had been waiting for this moment, tracking the deputy's movements and calculating angles. As Harris's attention shifted briefly toward the approaching footsteps, Kalen lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his size. Before Harris could react, Kalen had knocked the pistol aside and delivered a powerful blow to the deputy's solar plexus. Harris doubled over, gasping for breath, as Kalen relieved him of his weapon. Sorry, Wade, Kalen said without malice, but I can't let you take her. Working quickly, He used Harris's own handcuffs to secure the deputy to a support post, then stuffed a bandana in his mouth as a gag. "Mount up!" he ordered Mara, lifting Finn onto Sergeant's back before swinging up behind him. "We ride hard east. Stay off the main trails." They burst from the stable's rear doors just as Harris's companions entered from the front, their shouts of alarm quickly fading as Kalen led them into the darkness at a gallop. The night was bitterly cold, stars glittering like ice crystals in the black sky. Kalen set a punishing pace, knowing their head start would be measured in minutes rather than hours. Behind them, the sound of pursuit soon materialized. Harris's companions would have freed him quickly. "Where are we going?" Mara called over the drumming of hooves, one arm wrapped protectively around Nora, the other gripping her horse's mane. "There's a river crossing 5 miles east," Kalen shouted back. "If we can make it there, we can hide our trail." They rode without stopping, the horse's labored breathing visible in great clouds of vapor. Finn clung to the saddle horn, his small frame pressed back against his father's chest, as they navigated the treacherous terrain by moonlight. As promised, they reached the river, a swift, dark current partially frozen along its edges. Kalen dismounted, helping Finn down before assisting Mara. "We'll have to cross on foot," he explained, eyeing the dangerous water. "The current's too strong for horses carrying double." "It's freezing," Mara observed, clutching Nora closer for warmth. "Which is why they won't expect us to cross here." Kalen began unloading their essential supplies. "There's a ford 2 miles south, where most travelers cross. They'll head there first." Working methodically, he distributed their supplies into waterproof packs, making sure Finn had only what the boy could safely carry. He paid special attention to keeping their weapons and ammunition dry, wrapping his rifle in oilcloth before slinging it across his back. "The water's about waist deep at the center," he explained as they prepared. "Move slowly, test each step. I'll go first with a rope secured to my waist. Once I'm across, I'll pull it tight for you to hold on to as you cross." Mara nodded, though her face was pale with apprehension. "What about Nora?" Kalen studied the infant, now fully awake and whimpering softly. "Secure her as high on your chest as possible. I'll help steady you." The crossing was as harrowing as expected. The icy water bit into them like knives, the current threatening to sweep their feet from under them with each careful step. Kalen went first as planned, fighting his way across while keeping the rope secure. Finn followed his small body, buffeted by the current, until his father caught him and pulled him safely to the far bank. Mara went last. Nora strapped high on her chest above the waterline. Halfway across, she slipped on a submerged rock, plunging briefly up to her shoulders, before Kalen and Finn, pulling frantically on the rope, managed to steady her. By the time they all reached the far side, they were soaked and shivering violently. Kalen immediately set about building a small sheltered fire in a stand of pines, knowing that without warmth, the freezing temperatures would kill them as surely as any bullet. "Strip off the wet clothes," he instructed, his military training taking over. "We need to get dry immediately." They worked quickly, modesty set aside in the face of survival. Kalen helped Finn into dry clothes from their packs, then turned his attention to Mara and Nora. The infant was crying now, distressed by the cold and chaos. "She's so cold," Mara said through chattering teeth, her fingers fumbling with the wet wrappings around her daughter. Kalen took the child, using his body heat to warm her while Mara changed. "She'll be all right. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for." Once they were all in dry clothes and huddled around the small fire, Kalen assessed their situation. The horses were gone, released to prevent Harris and his men from tracking them directly. Their supplies were limited to what they could carry. Denver was still at least 2 days' journey on foot, through difficult terrain in the dead of winter. And now they were fugitives in the eyes of the law. "What happens if they catch us?" Finn asked quietly, breaking the tense silence. Kalen met his son's worried gaze steadily. "They won't." "But if they do," the boy persisted, "will they arrest you too, Pa?" "I won't let them take any of us," Kalen assured him, though the promise felt hollow even as he spoke it. The truth was, they were in a desperate position, and his options for protecting his son and their companions were dwindling rapidly. Mara, sensing Finn's fear, reached out to touch his shoulder. "Your father is right. We'll be fine. Judge Thorne will help us once we reach Denver." The boy nodded, wanting to believe them. Exhaustion soon claimed him, and he drifted into uneasy sleep nestled between Mara and his father for warmth. "You should rest too," Kalen told Mara once Finn's breathing had deepened. "I'll keep watch." "What will really happen if they catch us?" she asked softly, echoing Finn's question. Kalen's face was grim in the firelight. "They'll take you back to Silver Creek for a trial that's already decided. They'll take Nora, and they'll arrest me for interfering with the law. And Finn," his jaw tightened. "Best case, he goes to relatives back east I've never met. Worst case, he becomes a ward of the county which the Larks control." Mara absorbed this in silence, her arms tightening protectively around Nora. "I'm so sorry, Kalen. I've brought this down on all of you." "The Larks and I have been on a collision course for years," he replied, poking the fire to maintain its fragile heat. "This just hastened the inevitable." They sat in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the gentle crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of the sleeping children. "Tell me about your wife," Mara said suddenly. "Sarah, what was she like?" The question caught Kalen off guard, but after a moment's consideration he answered. "Kind, stubborn, smarter than most men I knew, including me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She could outshoot half the men in the regiment and outthink the other half." "You loved her very much," Mara observed. "I did." Kalen's expression softened with memory. "She's the one who convinced me to build the ranch after the war. Said we needed a place where Finn could grow up knowing peace. She sounds wonderful." "She was." His face darkened. "The fever took her when Finn was 2. Nothing I could do. All my skill with a rifle, and I couldn't save her from an enemy I couldn't see or fight." Mara reached across the sleeping children to touch his hand briefly. "I'm sure she'd be proud of the man you've become. The father you are to Finn." Kalen didn't reply, but something in his posture eased slightly at her words. After a while, Mara too succumbed to exhaustion, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the night. Dawn broke gray and threatening heavy clouds, promising more snow. They ate sparingly from their supplies, then continued eastward, Kalen carrying Finn on his shoulders when the boy's small legs tired in the deep snow. By midday, they had reached more traveled paths, where Kalen's expert tracking abilities allowed them to follow others' tracks, conserving energy. The terrain gradually flattened as they moved away from the foothills toward the plains that surrounded Denver. "How much further?" Mara asked during a brief rest nursing Nora beneath a makeshift shelter of pine boughs. "If we push hard, we might reach the outskirts by tomorrow night," Kalen replied, surveying the horizon. "From there, it's another half-day to Judge Thorne's offices. And you're certain he'll help us, even with a warrant against me? Thorne is a fair man. He'll listen to evidence before making judgments." Kalen's expression hardened. "Unlike Hargrove, who serves whoever pays the highest price." They resumed their journey, moving as quickly as their circumstances allowed. Kalen maintained a vigilant watch, frequently stopping to check for signs of pursuit. By late afternoon, dark clouds had entirely obscured the sun, and the first light flakes of snow began to fall. "We need shelter before this gets worse," Kalen decided, studying the thickening snowfall. "There's a line shack used by cattle drivers about a mile ahead. We can wait out the storm there." The abandoned line shack proved to be little more than 4 walls and a roof with a rusted stove and a few pieces of broken furniture. Still, it offered protection from the rapidly deteriorating weather, which had developed into a full blizzard by the time they reached it. Kalen secured the rickety door and immediately set about getting the stove working. Years of disuse had left it filled with debris, but after some effort, he managed to coax a small fire within its rusted confines. "It's not much," he apologized as they huddled around the meager heat, "but it's better than being outside." "It's perfect," Mara assured him, settling Nora in a nest of their driest blankets. "We're alive and we're together. That's what matters." Finn, exhausted from the day's trek, was already half asleep, his head nodding against Mara's shoulder. She gently stroked his hair, the gesture so natural it seemed she'd been caring for him far longer than their brief acquaintance. Watching them, Kalen felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. In just days, Mara had carved out a place in their lives that he hadn't realized was empty. And now, with danger pressing in from all sides, he was acutely aware of how much he had to lose. The storm raged through the night wind, howling around the small cabin like a living thing seeking entry. Kalen maintained the fire and kept watch, dozing only in brief intervals. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving a pristine white landscape transformed by drifts taller than a man in some places. "This will slow us down," he observed grimly, surveying the scene from the doorway. "But it will slow pursuit even more." They set out again after a sparse breakfast, Kalen breaking trail through snow that sometimes reached his thighs. Progress was agonizingly slow, each mile a victory of will over exhaustion. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise that offered their first distant view of Denver, a smudge of smoke and buildings on the horizon. We made it," Mara breathed, relief evident in her voice. "Not yet," Kalen cautioned. "We're still a day's journey away, and this is when we need to be most careful. The Larks will have men watching the approaches to the city." As if to underscore his warning, the distant crack of a rifle shot split the air. A bullet kicked up snow just feet from where they stood. "Down!" Kalen shouted, pushing Finn to the ground, while pulling Mara and Nora with him into the shelter of a nearby snowdrift. Another shot followed closer this time, the bullet whining overhead. Kalen crawled to the edge of the drift, rifle ready, scanning for the shooter. "Stay here," he ordered, pointing to a depression in the snow that offered some protection. "Don't move unless I call for you." Before Mara could protest, he was gone, moving with the silent efficiency that had made him legendary during the war. He circled wide, using every available cover, tracking the direction of the shots to a copse of trees about 300 yards distant. There was only one shooter, a sloppy mistake, if this was indeed a Lark operation. Professional manhunters would have positioned at least 3 men to triangulate their target. This suggested either overconfidence or desperation. Kalen approached from downwind, using the trees themselves as cover. The shooter was so focused on his original target that he never noticed the silent figure approaching from behind until the cold barrel of Kalen's Winchester pressed against his neck. "Drop it," Kalen ordered quietly. The man froze, then carefully lowered his rifle to the snow. "Don't shoot, mister. I'm just doing a job." "Turn around. Slowly." The shooter complied, revealing a weather-beaten face Kalen didn't recognize. Not one of the Lark ranch hands, but a typical bounty hunter drawn by the reward. "How much are they paying you?" Kalen asked, keeping his rifle trained on the man's chest. $200 for the woman and child." The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed slightly. "Plus expenses." That's all Mara's life is worth, to the Lark's $200. The man shrugged. Business is business, nothing personal. It's personal to me, Kalen replied coldly. Now strip. What? You heard me? All of it. Then start walking south. The bounty hunter's face reddened with anger. You can't be serious. It's freezing. You have a choice. Walk south naked with a chance of survival, or don't walk at all. Kalen's voice held no compromise. Decide now. 10 minutes later, Kalen returned to Mara and the children with the bounty hunter's clothes supplies and horse. Was that necessary? Mara asked quietly as they mounted the horse a sturdy bay that could easily carry her and both children. Yes, Kalen replied simply. He'll live if he's smart enough to keep moving until he finds shelter. And he won't follow us. With the addition of the horse, their pace increased dramatically. By nightfall, they had reached the outskirts of Denver, where scattered homesteads and farms began to replace the open wilderness. Kalen selected a small farm set back from the main road, its chimney showing signs of habitation. We'll ask for shelter, he decided. Most folks out here will take in travelers caught in winter, no questions asked. The farm belonged to an elderly couple named Abernathy, who welcomed them with the matter-of-fact hospitality of frontier people. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over the children while her husband shared his tobacco with Kalen, neither asking for more explanation than the simple cover story Kalen provided travelers caught in the storm heading to visit family in Denver. You're welcome to the barn, Mr. Abernathy offered. Got fresh hay and it's warm with the animals, better than trying to reach town in the dark. They accepted gratefully and soon were settled in the surprisingly comfortable hayloft, bellies full of Mrs. Abernathy's stew and cornbread. For the first time in days, they could all sleep without immediate fear, taking turns on watch, more from habit than necessity. When morning came, they thanked the Abernathys and continued toward Denver, now following a well-traveled road rutted with wagon tracks and hoof prints. The city grew steadily larger before them, its buildings rising from the plain like a promise of civilization and safety. We made it, Finn said with childish certainty as they approached the first proper streets. The Larks can't get us here, right, Putt? Before Kalen could respond, the thunder of approaching hooves drew his attention. A group of riders was coming hard down the road behind them, at least 6 men moving with clear purpose. Get off the road, he ordered sharply, helping Mara and the children dismount before leading their horse into a stand of trees beside the road. From their concealed position, they watched as the riders passed, and Kalen's heart sank. Leading the group was Roy Lark himself, his injured arm no longer in a sling, but clearly still favoring it. Behind him rode Samuel Lark, and 4 men Kalen recognized as some of the Lark's most trusted hands. They beat us here, he murmured, disbelief coloring his tone. How is that possible? Mara asked, clutching Nora protectively. We've been pushing so hard and with the storm. They must have known we were heading to Judge Thorne. Kalen's mind raced through the implications. They would have taken the main road with fresh horses riding relay. We never had a chance to outrun them. Finn tugged at his father's coat. What do we do now, Pa? Kalen watched the riders disappear into the city, his expression grim. We change our plan. Instead of going directly to Thorne, we need to find out what the Larks are doing here first. They entered Denver cautiously, Kalen purchasing simple disguises, from a general store on the outskirts, a proper bonnet and shawl, for Mara new caps for himself and Finn. With Nora bundled inconspicuously, they appeared to be nothing more than a family on business in the city. Denver in 1871 was a rapidly growing frontier town, its streets a chaotic mix of elegant brick buildings and hastily constructed wooden structures. Horses and wagons crowded the muddy thoroughfares alongside well-dressed businessmen and rough-looking miners fresh from the diggings. Kalen led them to a modest hotel near the courthouse, paying for 2 adjoining rooms with some of the money he'd brought for emergencies. "Wait here," he instructed Mara and the children. "I'm going to locate Judge Thorne's office and see if the Larks have been there yet." "Be careful," Mara urged, touching his arm. "If they see you—" "They won't," he assured her. "I spent 3 years behind enemy lines during the war. I know how to remain unseen." The courthouse was an impressive stone building at the center of town, its steps crowded with lawyers, officials, and citizens seeking justice or official papers. Kalen observed from across the street, noting with concern the presence of 2 Lark ranch hands positioned casually near the entrance. Moving with the confident stride of a man on legitimate business, he entered the building, keeping his hat low over his features. A directory board indicated Judge Thorne's chambers were on the 2nd floor, East Wing. As Kalen climbed the stairs, he heard raised voices coming from the corridor ahead. One of them unmistakably Roy Lark's strident tone. He slowed, positioning himself near a pillar where he could listen without being seen. "Don't care about jurisdiction," Roy was saying heatedly. "She's my wife, the child is mine, and I have a valid warrant for her arrest signed by Judge Hargrove, which is only enforceable in Silver Creek County." A deeper, more measured voice replied, presumably Judge Thorne. "Here in Denver, Mrs. Lark would be entitled to a new hearing before any action could be taken." "This is outrageous," Samuel Lark interjected. "We've ridden for days tracking a dangerous fugitive, and you're telling us we need to start the legal process from scratch." "That's precisely what I'm telling you, Mr. Lark." Judge Thorne's tone remained calm but firm. "The law applies equally to everyone, regardless of their financial standing or influence." Roy's voice dropped to a threatening growl. "My brother and I have friends in Denver too, Judge. Important friends who might question your fitness for the bench if you continue obstructing justice." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Lark?" The judge's voice hardened perceptibly. "Just stating facts," Roy replied smoothly. "Now, about those papers." Kalen had heard enough. He retreated silently, making his way back to the hotel to share what he'd learned with Mara. "Judge Thorne is resisting them for now," he explained as they gathered in Mara's room, "but the Larks are applying pressure. It's only a matter of time before they find a way around him." "So what do we do?" Mara asked, rocking a fussing Nora gently. Kalen paced the small room, considering their options. "We need to approach Thorne directly before the Larks can sway him. But we have to be careful. They are watching the courthouse." "Could we send a message?" Finn suggested, eager to contribute. "Like when you sent letters with Tommy Jenkins during the Thompson Range War." Kalen smiled slightly at his son's recollection. "That's good thinking, Finn. We could try to get a note to the judge asking for a private meeting away from the courthouse." As they discussed possibilities, a commotion in the street below drew their attention. Looking out the window, they saw Sheriff James Morgan dismounting from an exhausted horse. His normally neat appearance disheveled his face, showing signs of rough treatment. "Morgan," Kalen breathed in surprise. "Harris said he was being held for questioning." "He looks like he's been through hell," Mara observed, noting the sheriff's split lip and bruised face. Without hesitation, Kalen grabbed his hat. "Stay here. Lock the door. I'm going to talk to him." He intercepted Morgan at the hotel's small dining room, where the sheriff was gratefully accepting a glass of whiskey from the sympathetic bartender. Morgan's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with concern. "Voss," he muttered, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "You shouldn't be here. The Larks have men all over town." "So I've noticed," Kalen replied quietly, sliding into the seat opposite Morgan. "You look like you've had a rough few days." Morgan touched his split lip gingerly. Hargrove had me arrested for obstruction of justice, said I was interfering with the Lark investigation. He took a careful sip of whiskey. 3 days in my own jail being questioned by Wade Harris and some of Roy's boys. How did you get free? My wife, Clara, Morgan said with a hint of pride. She rode to the next county, found Judge Wilson, and got him to issue a writ for my release. By the time she got back, Hargrove couldn't ignore a superior court order without consequences even he couldn't handle. Kaylin absorbed this information with growing concern. If they're willing to arrest a sheriff, they won't hesitate to do worse to us. Where's the woman and her child? Morgan asked, lowering his voice further. Safe for now. We're trying to get to Judge Thorne, but the Larks are watching him closely. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. Thorne's a good man, incorruptible, but the Larks have connections even here. He leaned forward, speaking barely above a whisper. There's something bigger going on, Voss. Something beyond a domestic dispute. What do you mean? Before they locked me up, I was investigating silver shipments from the Lark mines. Official records show regular shipments to Denver banks, but I found discrepancies. Morgan's eyes were deadly serious. I think they're smuggling silver across the Mexican border to avoid taxation and federal oversight. That would explain their desperation to silence Mara, Kaylin realized. If she witnessed anything during her time at the ranch— Exactly. Morgan drained his whiskey. And that's not all. Remember those bandits who hit the Army payroll last spring? 3 soldiers killed. I found a distinctive rifle shell at the scene. Same rare ammunition Roy Lark, special orders from back east. The implications were staggering. If the Larks were involved in not just smuggling but armed robbery and murder of federal troops, they would stop at nothing to eliminate anyone who might connect them to the crimes. We need to get Mara to Thorne immediately, Kaylin decided. Her testimony, combined with your evidence, could bring down the entire Lark operation, Morgan finished grimly. Which is why they'll kill all of us before letting that happen. As if summoned by their conversation, the hotel's front doors burst open. Wade Harris entered, flanked by 2 deputies Kaylin didn't recognize, likely Denver lawmen recruited by the Larks. James Morgan, Harris called, spotting the sheriff immediately. You're wanted for questioning regarding the escape of a federal prisoner in Silver Creek. Morgan rose slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his empty holster. His weapons had been confiscated during his arrest. That's a lie, Wade, and you know it, he replied loudly enough for the entire room to hear. There are no federal prisoners in Silver Creek. Harris's eyes shifted to Kaylin recognition and something like regret flashing briefly across his features. Captain Voss, what a surprising coincidence. No coincidence, Wade, Kaylin replied evenly, calculating the distance to the back door and the odds of reaching it before bullets started flying. I came looking for justice. Something in short supply back home lately. Harris motioned to his deputies. Arrest them both. Captain Voss is wanted for assaulting an officer and aiding a fugitive. The deputies moved forward cautiously, hands on their weapons. Morgan tensed beside Kaylin, clearly preparing to fight, despite the poor odds. Don't, Kaylin murmured. Not here. Too many innocent people who could get hurt. Morgan hesitated, then gave an almost imperceptible nod. What's your play? Before Kaylin could respond, the hotel's back door slammed open. Roy and Samuel Lark entered with 3 armed men, effectively cutting off their escape route. Well, well, Roy drawled, a cold smile spreading across his face as he spotted Kaylin. If it isn't the great Captain Voss. Harboring my wife wasn't enough, Now you're conspiring with a disgraced sheriff, too. Your wife fled because you tried to kill her and your child, Kalen replied, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent room. Everyone in Silver Creek knows what kind of man you are. Roy's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. My wife is mentally unstable. Has been since the birth. Tragic, really. He made a show of looking around. Where is she, Captain? Where's Catherine? Safe from you, Kalen stated flatly. No one's safe from justice, Samuel interjected smoothly, addressing the room at large. We have legal warrants for Catherine Lark's arrest. Anyone harboring her is breaking the law. A tense silence fell over the room, the hotel patrons and staff watching the confrontation with wary fascination. Harris and his deputies had moved to flank Kalen and Morgan, while the Lark men covered the exits. Last chance, boss, Roy said, his hand moving to rest on his holstered pistol. Tell me where my wife and child are, or I'll have you arrested and charged as an accessory to attempted murder. Kalen's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. Fighting would endanger innocent bystanders. Surrender meant Mara and Nora would be at Roy's mercy. Running was impossible with both exits covered. Time's up, Roy declared, nodding to Harris. Take him. As Harris stepped forward, the front door opened once more. A distinguished older man entered, flanked by two uniformed marshals. Judge William Thorne Kalen recognized him from descriptions, surveyed the scene with evident disapproval. What's the meaning of this disruption, gentlemen? He demanded, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension. Serving justice, Your Honor, Roy replied quickly, adopting a more respectful tone. Apprehending fugitives from Silver Creek. Judge Thorne's stern gaze swept over the assembled men. In my jurisdiction, without consulting my court. That's not how the law works, Mr. Lark. We have valid warrants signed by Judge Hargrove, Samuel protested, producing the papers, which must be properly recognized by a Denver court before being executed here, Thorne countered firmly. As I explained in my chambers earlier today. He turned to the marshals. Clear this room. Anyone not a registered guest of this hotel is to leave immediately. The marshals moved to comply, their federal authority brooking no argument, even from the Larks. As the room began to empty, Judge Thorne approached Kalen and Morgan. Sheriff Morgan, Captain Voss, he acknowledged formally. I believe we have matters to discuss, in private. Hope flickered briefly in Kalen's chest, until he glanced toward the staircase and froze. Standing at the top of the stairs, holding a terrified Finn by the arm, while another man carried a struggling Nora, was Samuel Lark. Looking for these, Captain, Samuel called down, a triumphant smile on his face. Beside him, Mara appeared, restrained by two more Lark men, her face bloody from an apparent struggle. We found your room key in your coat pocket, Samuel explained. While everyone was distracted down here, we conducted our own search of the hotel. Family reunion at last. Roy's cold laugh echoed through the now silent room. Well, Judge Thorne, it seems we've resolved the matter without troubling your court after all. My wife and child have been recovered. Kalen lunged forward instinctively, only to be restrained by Harris and his deputies. If you've hurt them, he began, his voice a dangerous growl. Now, Captain, Roy interrupted. They're my family, not yours, though I'm curious why you've taken such a personal interest in my wife. He turned to Mara, his expression hardening. We have much to discuss, Catherine, about loyalty, about secrets, about that child you claim is mine. Mara's eyes filled with fear and desperation, locked with Kalen's across the room. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever happened next, there would be no surrender, no giving up. Judge Thorne, Kalen called, never breaking eye contact with Mara. Sheriff Morgan has evidence linking the Larks to federal crimes. Smuggling. The Army payroll robbery last spring. 3 soldiers killed. Roy's smug expression faltered slightly. Desperate lies from a desperate man. I have documentation, Morgan confirmed, addressing Thorne directly. Hidden, but retrievable. Enough to warrant a federal investigation. Judge Thorne's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. Serious allegations, Sheriff. Baseless slander, Samuel countered, and irrelevant to the matter at hand, the return of my brother's wife and child to his lawful custody. Nothing is irrelevant when it comes to justice, Thorne replied evenly. Mr. Lark, I must insist that the woman and children be brought down immediately and this matter settled properly in my court. Roy's facade of civility cracked slightly. With all due respect, Judge, my wife is mentally unstable and dangerous. For everyone's safety, we'll be returning to Silver Creek immediately. That wasn't a request, Mr. Lark, Thorne stated coldly. Marshal, please escort Mrs. Lark and the children down here. The marshal moved toward the stairs, but Samuel gestured to his men, who tightened their hold on their captives. I wouldn't, Samuel warned. My men are armed and on edge. Accidents happen so easily in such tense situations. The standoff stretched to a breaking point, neither side willing to back down. Finn's frightened eyes found his father's silently pleading for rescue. Mara stood defiant despite her injuries, while Nora had begun wailing in the arms of her captor. Enough! Roy suddenly shouted, pulling his pistol and aiming it directly at Kaylin. This ends now. We're leaving with my wife and child. Anyone who interferes dies, starting with Captain Voss. The explosion that followed seemed to shake the very foundations of the hotel, but it wasn't from Roy's gun. The back wall of the dining room burst inward in a shower of splinters and dust, as a wagon crashed partially through it, driven by a familiar figure. Clara Morgan, the sheriff's wife, sat on the driver's seat, a shotgun in her hands. James, she called, time to go. The chaos that erupted provided the distraction Kaylin needed. He drove his elbow into Harris's stomach, then wrenched free immediately, racing for the stairs, despite the bullets that began flying around him. Samuel, seeing Kaylin's charge, pushed Finn toward the nearest Lark man and drew his own weapon. Stop him! Kaylin dodged the first shot, taking the stairs 3 at a time, driven by a father's desperate need to reach his son. Behind him, he was vaguely aware of Morgan and Judge Thorne, taking cover of Clara Morgan's shotgun, booming of Roy Lark, shouting orders. None of it mattered. All that mattered was reaching Finn, Mara, and Nora before the Larks could escape with them. He reached the top of the stairs just as Samuel fired again, the bullet grazing Kaylin's arm in a line of fire. Ignoring the pain, Kaylin launched himself at the younger Lark brother, driving them both to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Run, Mara! He shouted, struggling to keep Samuel pinned while reaching for his dropped weapon. Mara fought against her captors with renewed vigor, breaking free long enough to lunge toward the man holding Nora. She clawed at his face, drawing blood, forcing him to release the infant to defend himself. Finn, showing his father's resourcefulness, bit down hard on his captor's hand, then squirmed free when the man yelped in pain. For a moment, freedom seemed within reach, until Roy Lark appeared at the top of the stairs, face contorted with rage, pistol leveled at Kaylin's head, as he continued to wrestle with Samuel. I should have done this years ago, Roy snarled, cocking the hammer. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Roy staggered, a look of shock replacing his rage, as a crimson stain bloomed on his chest. Behind him stood Wade Harris, his smoking pistol still raised. No more Roy, Harris said quietly, No more blood for the Lark family. Samuel howled in fury beneath Calin, redoubling his efforts to break free. In the struggle, his hand found his fallen pistol. Before Calin could react, Samuel fired wildly. The bullet missed Calin entirely, but struck Wade Harris squarely in the throat. The deputy collapsed, blood pouring from the fatal wound, his eyes already glazing over. Taking advantage of Calin's momentary shock, Samuel shoved him aside and staggered to his feet. "Kill them all!" he screamed to his remaining men. "Kill them all!" The hotel erupted into a full-scale gun battle. From below, Clara Morgan's shotgun roared again, while Judge Thorne's marshals returned fire against the Lark men. Calin scrambled toward Finn, who had taken cover behind an overturned table. "Stay down," he ordered, then turned to locate Mara and Nora. He spotted them at the far end of the hallway, Mara cradling Nora, while desperately trying to open a window that would lead to the adjacent building's roof. One of the Lark men was advancing on her pistol drawn. Calin lunged for Wade's fallen weapon, seized it, and fired in one fluid motion. The Lark man dropped, but the shot drew Samuel's attention. "You," Samuel spat, training his pistol on Calin. "You've destroyed everything." "The Larks destroyed themselves," Calin replied, his own weapon steady, "through greed and cruelty." They fired simultaneously. Calin felt the burning shock of a bullet tearing through his side, but had the grim satisfaction of seeing his own shot strike Samuel squarely in the chest. The younger Lark brother collapsed, without another word. Fighting through the pain, Calin made his way to Finn, gathering his son in one arm while keeping his weapon ready. "Pa, you're hurt," Finn cried, seeing the blood soaking his father's shirt. "I'm all right," Calin assured him, though the room had begun to spin alarmingly. "We need to reach Mara and Nora." Together they moved down the hallway, stepping over bodies of fallen Lark men. The gunfire from below had diminished, suggesting the battle there was also concluding. They found Mara still struggling with the window, her face streaked with tears and blood. When she saw them, relief flooded her features. "Calin, Finn, oh thank God." She reached for them, still clutching Nora tightly. "I thought—" Her words cut off abruptly, eyes widening in horror as she looked past them. Calin turned too slowly to see Roy Lark leaning against the wall, blood pouring from his chest wound, but his pistol steadied with both hands. "If I die," he gasped, "you all die with me." Time seemed to slow as Roy's finger tightened on the trigger. Calin knew he couldn't raise his weapon fast enough, couldn't shield Finn and Mara from the bullet's path. In that frozen moment, he made the only choice possible. He lunged forward, placing his body directly between his loved ones and Roy's gun. The shot echoed through the hallway. Calin felt the impact like a hammer blow to his chest, driving the air from his lungs. He stumbled backward into Mara's arms as Roy's pistol clattered to the floor, the dying man following it down. "Calin!" Ashra's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "Oh God, Calin, stay with us." He tried to respond, but blood filled his mouth. Through darkening vision, he saw Finn's terrified face, felt Mara's tears falling on his cheek, heard Nora's frightened cries. "Keep them safe," he managed to whisper, before darkness claimed him completely. The last thing he heard was Mara's voice, fierce through her tears. "Don't you dare leave us, Calin Voss. Don't you dare." Calin drifted through darkness, punctuated by brief, painful flashes of consciousness. Voices came and went, Mara's desperate pleading. Finn's frightened questions, unfamiliar medical terms exchanged in urgent tones. Each time, awareness threatened to fully return pain drove him back into the merciful void. Eventually, the darkness began to thin like morning fog, burning away under the sun's persistent heat. He became aware of sensations, rough sheets beneath him, the weight of bandages around his chest and side, the dull throb of wounds beginning to heal. He opened his eyes to find himself in an unfamiliar room, sunlight filtering through partially drawn curtains. The space was sparse but clean, a small table beside the bed, a chair where Finn sat slumped in exhausted sleep, his small hand still clutching his father's. Kalen tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. The slight movement as he attempted to swallow was enough to wake Finn, whose eyes flew open instantly. "Pa!" The boy's face transformed from exhaustion to joy in an instant. "You're awake. Ma said you would be, but the doctor wasn't sure. And it's been so long and I was scared, but I didn't cry much. I promise." The words tumbled out in a rush as Finn pressed himself against Kalen's side, careful to avoid the bandaged areas. Kalen managed to lift his hand enough to rest it on his son's head, the simple touch conveying more than words could. "Water," he finally croaked. Finn immediately reached for a cup on the bedside table, helping Kalen take small sips. The cool liquid was the most wonderful thing he'd ever tasted. "Where?" he managed after a moment. "Judge Thorne's house," Finn explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's really big, Pa, bigger than 3 of our cabins put together, and there are servants who bring food whenever you want it." Kalen almost smiled at his son's wonder, but concern quickly overshadowed the moment. "Mara Nora." "They're fine, Pa. Ma's just getting some rest. She hasn't slept much since you got shot." Finn's voice faltered on the last words, his small face suddenly solemn. "The doctor said you almost died. Twice." Before Kalen could respond, the door opened quietly. Mara entered Nora sleeping against her shoulder. She froze when she saw Kalen's open eyes, her own filling instantly with tears. "You're awake," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow undo this miracle. She crossed the room quickly, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Up close, Kalen could see the toll the past days had taken on her dark circles beneath her eyes, a healing cut on her cheek, a new thinness to her face. "How long?" he asked, his voice slightly stronger after the water. 8 days, she replied, brushing hair from his forehead with a trembling hand. "The doctor wasn't sure you'd—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "The Larks," Kalen prompted, needing to know if the threat remained. "Dead, both Roy and Samuel." A shadow crossed her face. "And many others. It was a bloodbath, Kalen." "Wade Harris," she shook her head sadly. "He didn't survive. But before he died, he confessed everything to Judge Thorne, how he shot John Lark during the war, how the Larks had been using that knowledge to control him for years, forcing him to look the other way while they built their criminal empire." Kalen absorbed this information silently. Wade's final act had been one of redemption, saving Kalen's life at the cost of his own, then ensuring the truth would finally be known. "Sheriff Morgan," he asked next. "He's fine. He and Clara are staying here too. The judge has taken a personal interest in the case." Mara adjusted Nora gently as the infant stirred. "Morgan's evidence combined with Wade's confession has launched a federal investigation into the Lark family's businesses. They've already uncovered the smuggling operation, and they're looking into the Army payroll robbery." Kalen nodded slightly, wincing at the pain the small movement caused. "And you, the charges." A small smile touched Mara's lips. "Dismissed. Judge Thorne reviewed the evidence and declared the warrant invalid." "I'm a free woman, Kalen." Her smile faded. "Though I have nowhere to go now." "Home," Finn declared with a child's simple certainty. "You and Nora are coming home with us." "Right, Pa." Kaelin met Mara's eyes over his son's head, seeing the question there, the vulnerability. "Right," he confirmed softly. Relief washed over her face, and she reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the quiet broken only by Nora's gentle breathing and Finn's excited whispers about the wonders of Judge Thorne's Denver mansion. Eventually, exhaustion reclaimed Kaelin, pulling him back toward sleep. As his eyes grew heavy, he heard Mara whisper to Finn, "Let your father rest now. We'll be right here when he wakes." The last thing he felt before darkness took him again was Mara's lips brushing softly against his forehead. Recovery was a slow, painful process. The bullet that struck Kaelin's chest had missed his heart by less than an inch, collapsing his lung and fracturing 2 ribs before lodging against his spine. The second wound, a clean through and through to his side, was less severe, but had caused significant blood loss. "You're fortunate to be alive, Captain," Dr. Wallace stated plainly during his daily examination 2 weeks after the shooting. "Most men would have died from either wound, let alone both." "I had something to live for," Kaelin replied, simply, his eyes finding Mara and the children across the room. Judge William Thorne proved to be not only a fair jurist, but a generous host, insisting that Kaelin and his makeshift family remain at his Denver home until the captain was well enough to travel. The judge, a tall, austere man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing, had taken a personal interest in their situation. "The Lark case has exposed corruption that runs deeper than any of us suspected," Thorne explained during one of his regular visits to Kaelin's sick room. "Judge Hargrove has been removed from the bench pending investigation. 3 bankers in Silver Creek have been arrested for helping launder smuggling proceeds. Even the territorial governor is facing questions about his relationship with the Lark mining interests." "And my ranch?" Kaelin asked, attempting to sit up straighter despite the pain. "Did they burn it after all?" "Surprisingly, no," Sheriff Morgan answered, having joined them for this conversation. "Clara rode out there after things settled down. Place was untouched, though your livestock needed attention. She arranged for the Peterson boy to look after things until you return." Relief washed over Kaelin. The ranch represented everything he'd built since the war, a legacy for Finn, a place of peace carved from wilderness. Losing it would have been like losing a part of himself. "There's something else you should know," Judge Thorne added, his expression becoming more formal. "With the Lark brothers dead and no direct heirs, their properties are in legal limbo. The mining operations have been seized by the federal government pending investigation, but their personal holdings, including the main ranch, will eventually be auctioned to settle debts and claims." Kaelin nodded, unsure why this concerned him directly. "Sheriff Morgan has suggested," Thorne continued, "that you might have a legitimate claim to compensation from the Lark estate, not only for the injuries sustained but for the years of harassment and attempted land seizure." "I don't want their blood money," Kaelin replied immediately. "Not even if it secured Finn's future?" Mara asked quietly from her position by the window. "Or helped rebuild what was damaged by their actions?" Kaelin considered this perspective, his natural aversion to profiting from the Larks' downfall, warring with his pragmatic concern for his son's welfare. "Think about it, Captain," Thorne advised, rising to leave. "Justice takes many forms. Sometimes it includes restitution." As the judge and sheriff departed, Mara moved to sit beside Kaelin's bed, Nora sleeping peacefully in her arms. Finn had gone with Clara Morgan to the kitchen, enticed by the promise of freshly baked cookies. "You're troubled," Mara observed, studying Kaelin's face. "I spent years defining myself in opposition to the Larks," he admitted. "Fighting their influence, resisting their pressure. Now they're gone, and I'm not sure what that means for who I am." "You're still Kalen Voss," she replied simply. Father, rancher, protector. Her free hand found his. "The larks didn't define you. Your choices did." Her words settled over him like a balm. She was right, of course. The end of the lark threat didn't diminish who he was, it merely opened possibilities for who he might become. "There's something else," he said after a moment. "Something I've been meaning to ask." Mara tilted her head questioningly. "Finn called you Ma earlier. Has he been doing that often?" A flush crept up her cheeks. "It started while you were unconscious. He was so frightened, and it just happened naturally. I tried to correct him at first, but..." She hesitated. "Should I ask him to stop?" "No," Kalen replied softly. "Unless it makes you uncomfortable." "It doesn't," she assured him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's the greatest honor anyone has ever given me." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, Kalen squeezed her hand gently. "When we return to the ranch," he said, "we should discuss making certain arrangements official, for the children's sake." Mara's breath caught. "Are you asking—" "Not properly," he interrupted with the ghost of a smile. "Not yet. When I do, it won't be from a sickbed with barely enough strength to sit up." Her answering smile was radiant. "I'll hold you to that, Captain Voss." 4 weeks after the gunfight at the Denver hotel, Dr. Wallace finally declared Kalen fit enough for limited travel. Though still weak and requiring frequent rest, he could now walk short distances unassisted and remain awake for most of the day. "The journey to Silver Creek will be difficult," the doctor warned. "I'd recommend waiting another 2 weeks, but I understand your desire to return home." Preparations for departure began immediately. Judge Thorne arranged for a well-sprung carriage that would provide the most comfortable transportation possible. Sheriff Morgan and Clara would accompany them both to provide assistance during the journey, and because they too were eager to return to Silver Creek and begin rebuilding their community in the wake of the Lark's downfall. The evening before their planned departure, Judge Thorne hosted a small dinner in his private study, an unprecedented honor, according to his housekeeper. Seated around the richly appointed table were Kalen Mara, the Morgans, and a distinguished gentleman Thorne introduced as Federal Marshal Edward Bannister. "Marshal Bannister has been overseeing the investigation into the Lark operations," Thorne explained as servants presented the first course. "He has some information I thought you should all hear before returning to Silver Creek." Bannister, a square-jawed man with steel-gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent more time outdoors than behind a desk, nodded solemnly. "The Lark case has proven to be one of the most extensive criminal enterprises we've uncovered in the territory." He began, his deep voice carrying the natural authority of command. "Silver smuggling, tax evasion, judicial bribery, witness intimidation. And yes, Sheriff Morgan, your suspicions about the Army payroll robbery were correct. We've recovered documents linking the Larks directly to that operation." Morgan nodded grimly, vindicated, but taking no pleasure in the confirmation that 3 soldiers had died at the Larks' command. "What's equally concerning," Bannister continued, "is the extent of their political influence. Judge Hargrove was merely the most visible official in their pocket. We've identified at least 7 others, including 2 territorial representatives and a federal customs inspector." "How far back does it go?" Clara Morgan asked, her practical mind always seeking the root of problems. "At least to the end of the war," Bannister replied, "when John Lark returned to Colorado and took control of the family business. From what we've pieced together, he was the architect of the smuggling operation using contacts he'd made during the conflict to establish routes into Mexico." Kalen absorbed this information silently, thinking of the John Lark he'd known, brutal, ambitious, without moral constraints. It made perfect sense that he would translate wartime tactics into criminal enterprise once peace was declared. "There's something else you should know," Bannister added, his eyes moving to Mara. "Something about Roy Lark, specifically." Mara tensed visibly, her hand finding Kalen's beneath the table. "We found extensive correspondence between Roy and various doctors in the East," the Marshal explained carefully. "It appears he was documenting his wife's behavior, building a case for her mental instability long before she fled." "That's absurd," Kalen interjected. "Mara is perfectly sound." "Of course she is," Bannister agreed. "But Roy was methodically creating a paper trail, suggesting otherwise. My belief, based on the timing of these letters, is that he intended to have her committed to an asylum once the child was born." A chill settled over the table. Involuntary commitment to asylums was a fate many considered worse than prison or even death. Stories of the treatments inflicted on patients, particularly women diagnosed with female hysteria or moral insanity, were enough to terrify even the most stoic individuals. "But why?" Clara asked, breaking the heavy silence. "If he suspected the child wasn't his, as Mara believes, why not simply divorce her?" "Scandal," Judge Thorne suggested. "Divorce is public. Questions would be asked, documents filed. The Larks couldn't risk that level of scrutiny, not with their illegal operations." "And a wife in an asylum can't testify against her husband," Morgan added grimly. "Can't tell anyone what she might have seen or heard at the Lark Ranch." Mara had gone pale, her free hand unconsciously moving to touch Nora's head where the infant slept in a bassinet beside her chair. "He would have taken her," she whispered. "My baby. And I would have disappeared into some hellish institution, unable to protect her or myself." Kalen's grip on her hand tightened. "That didn't happen," he reminded her gently, "and it never will. You're safe now. Both of you." Marshal Bannister cleared his throat. "There is one more matter. The Lark estate." He extracted several official-looking documents from a leather portfolio. "As Judge Thorne mentioned previously, with no direct heirs, the properties will be sold to settle debts and legal claims." He slid one document across the table to Kalen. "This is a formal recognition of your claim against the estate, Captain Voss, for harassment, attempted illegal seizure of your land, and, of course, the injuries sustained during your encounter in Denver." Kalen glanced at the paper without touching it, noting the substantial sum listed as compensation. "Additionally," Bannister continued, "there's the matter of the main Lark Ranch itself. The federal government has no interest in maintaining it, and it will be among the first properties auctioned." "And what will happen to the workers?" Mara asked, concern evident in her voice. Many of the ranch hands weren't involved in the Larks' criminal activities. They were just earning a living. "That will depend on the new owner," Bannister replied. "Which brings me to my final point." He slid another document forward. "Judge Thorne and I have discussed this matter at length, and we believe there would be significant advantages if the ranch were to pass into the right hands." Kalen finally picked up the first document, scanning its contents more carefully. "You're suggesting I use this settlement to purchase the Lark Ranch?" "It would be poetic justice," Thorne observed with the hint of a smile. "And practically speaking, the combined properties would make you one of the largest landholders in the county, a position from which you could help rebuild Silver Creek into something better than it was under Lark influence." The prospect was simultaneously tempting and unsettling. The Lark Ranch was 5 times the size of Kalen's modest property, with better water access and prime grazing land. Combined with his existing homestead, it would indeed create a formidable operation. But living in the house where Roy Lark had abused Mara, taking over the business built on corruption and violence, could any amount of poetic justice overcome those shadows? "I'll need to think about it," Kalin said, finally folding the document carefully. Of course, Bannister agreed. There's no rush on your decision. The auctions won't begin for at least 2 months, given the legal complexities. The conversation shifted to more immediate concerns about their journey home, but Kalin remained distracted, weighing the unexpected proposition. He noticed Mara watching him thoughtfully, but she offered no opinion, clearly understanding this was a decision he needed to reach on his own terms. Later that evening, as they walked slowly through Thorne's garden, Kalin's daily exercise, as prescribed by Dr. Wallace Mara, finally broached the subject. "Would it be so terrible," she asked quietly, "taking over the Lark Ranch?" Kalin considered before answering. "It's not the land itself that troubles me. Land is neutral. It doesn't carry the sins of those who owned it before." "Then what? Pride, perhaps," he admitted. "I built my place from nothing. Every fence post, every floorboard set with my own hands. The Lark Ranch was built with blood money and other men's labor." Mara nodded understanding. "But couldn't something good come from it now? A fresh start, not just for the land, but for the people who worked it. Most of the ranch hands were decent men following orders." "Like soldiers," Kalin observed, the parallel not lost on him. "Exactly." She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "The Larks are gone, Kalin. Their influence ended with them. What matters now is who fills that void. If not you, then who? Another wealthy outsider with no connection to the community. Another man who might exploit rather than rebuild." Her logic was sound, and Kalin found his resistance weakening. Perhaps there was a kind of redemption possible, not just for himself, but for the land and people the Larks had controlled for so long. "I'll consider it," he promised, "but whatever I decide, it won't change our plans." He took her hand in his. "You and Nora have a home with us regardless." Mara's smile was answer enough. The journey back to Silver Creek took 5 days longer than usual due to Kalin's need for frequent rest and the careful pace required to avoid aggravating his healing wounds. Finn, excited to be traveling again under happier circumstances, appointed himself his father's personal caretaker, solemnly reporting to Dr. Wallace before departure that he would ensure Pa doesn't overdo it. They traveled in a small convoy, Judge Thorne's carriage carrying Kalin, Mara, and the children, the Morgans in their own wagon, and 2 federal marshals as escorts, a precaution Marshal Bannister had insisted upon despite the Lark's demise. Criminal empires rarely fall without a few desperate loyalists remaining, he'd warned. Better safe than sorry. As they crossed into familiar territory, Kalin found himself studying the landscape with new eyes. The rolling hills and pine forests that had been his home for years now seemed somehow different, as if the defeat of the Larks had literally changed the quality of light and shadow across the land. "It's strange," he commented to Mara as they crested the final ridge before Silver Creek came into view. "I never realized how much their presence colored everything, even the way I saw the country itself." Mara nodded, understanding completely. "Fear does that. It narrows your vision, makes you see threats in every shadow." Silver Creek itself had changed in their absence. As they rolled down the main street, Kalin noted new construction underway, a busy atmosphere that had been lacking before. The Territorial Marshal's office had established a temporary headquarters in what had once been the Lark Mining Company offices, and unfamiliar faces in federal uniforms moved purposefully among the townspeople. Word of their arrival spread quickly. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered, not hostile, as Kalin had half expected, but curious and even welcoming. Many approached to shake Morgan's hand, welcoming him back to his rightful position. Mrs. Halverton, the stern widow who ran the general store, pushed her way through to the carriage. Her usually severe expression softened with what might almost have been a smile. "Captain Voss," she acknowledged with a nod. "Heard you nearly died taking down the larks." She peered into the carriage at Mara and the children. "Brought your family home, I see. Good. This town needs more decent folk." Before Kalin could correct her assumption about his relationship with Mara, Mrs. Halverton had moved on, shooing away other curious onlookers to allow them space to disembark. "News travels fast," Mara observed with a small smile, as Kalin helped her down from the carriage, Nora secure in her arms. "And grows with each telling, apparently," he replied, noting how the townspeople were looking at them not as fugitives or troublemakers, but as something approaching heroes. Sheriff Morgan approached after securing his own wagon. "Word from Peterson is that your ranch is still in good shape, Voss. No trouble while we were gone." "Thank you, James." Kalin extended his hand, which Morgan clasped firmly. "For everything." The sheriff shook his head. "I should be thanking you. What you and Mara risked, well, let's just say Silver Creek owes you a debt that can't be repaid." "No debts between friends," Kalin replied simply. After arrangements were made to continue to Kalin's ranch the following morning, the doctor insisting he rest properly after the day's travel, they secured rooms at the hotel. The establishment, like much of the town, seemed transformed from their last visit. The proprietor, once coldly efficient, now welcomed them effusively, offering his best accommodations at no charge. "Consider it the town's way of showing appreciation, Captain," he explained when Kalin attempted to pay. "What you did for Silver Creek? Well, we're finally free." That evening, as Finn slept soundly in the adjoining room and Nora dozed in a borrowed cradle, Kalin and Mara sat by the window overlooking the main street. The town was quieter now, lanterns glowing warmly in windows, occasional laughter drifting up from the saloon. "It's strange," Mara observed softly. "Last time we were here, we were running for our lives. Now they're treating us like returning heroes." "People adapt quickly when power shifts," Kalin replied, though without cynicism. "Many probably resented the Lark's control, but were too afraid to show it. And now? Now they have a chance to build something better." He reached for her hand. "We all do." She intertwined her fingers with his. "Have you decided about the ranch?" Kalin nodded slowly. "I think I have. Seeing the town today, the changes already beginning, I want to be part of that. Not just for myself or Finn, but for everyone who suffered under the Larks." "You'll make a good steward of that land," Mara said with quiet confidence. "A fair employer, a decent neighbor." "We will," he corrected gently, "if you're willing." Her answer was in her eyes, bright with unshed tears, and a future neither had dared imagine just weeks before. Their moment was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Kalin rose carefully, hand instinctively moving toward his holster before remembering he wasn't armed. Old habits died hard. He opened the door to find a young boy, perhaps 12, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Message for Captain Voss," the boy announced, thrusting forward a folded paper. "Man said it's important." "What man?" Kalin asked, accepting the note. "Dunno. Stranger. Paid me 2 bits to deliver it." The boy shrugged. "Said you'd want to read it right away." Kalin gave the boy a coin of his own, then closed the door and unfolded the paper. The message was brief, written in a careful hand. "Captain Voss, not all Lark business died with the brothers. Some matters remain unfinished. If you value your family's safety, meet me at dawn at the old Willow Creek crossing. Come alone. This concerns the child. An interested party." Kalen's blood ran cold. He passed the note silently to Mara, watching as her face drained of color. "It's a trap," she whispered. "It has to be." "Likely," he agreed, moving to the window to scan the darkened street below. "But we can't ignore it." "We should tell Sheriff Morgan," Mara insisted. "Or the federal marshals." Kalen shook his head slowly. "The note specifically warns against involving others. Until we know what this is about, we can't risk it." "So you'll just walk into an obvious ambush?" Her voice rose slightly before she controlled it, glancing toward the sleeping children. "Kalen, you're still healing. You can barely ride." "I don't intend to fight if I can avoid it," he assured her. "But I need to know what threat remains. Who else might be coming for us?" Mara stood, moving to face him directly. "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not," Kalen replied firmly. "The children need you here." "The children need both of us," she countered. "We'll ask Clara to watch them. She and James are just down the hall." Kalen recognized the determination in her eyes, the same fierce protectiveness he'd seen the night she arrived at his door with Nora in her arms. This wasn't a battle he would win. "We go together," he conceded finally. "But at the first sign of trouble, you withdraw. No arguments." She nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you for not asking me to stay behind while you face this alone. I couldn't bear it." Kalen drew her gently into his arms, mindful of his healing wounds. "Whatever comes, we face it together now. That's what family means." As they held each other in the quiet room, the mysterious note lay open on the table, a stark reminder that despite all they had overcome, one final challenge awaited them at dawn. Dawn painted the eastern sky in washes of pink and gold as Kalen and Mara approached Willow Creek Crossing. The location, a shallow ford where the creek narrowed between rocky banks, was well chosen for an ambush, offering multiple vantage points and limited escape routes. They had left the children with Clara Morgan after a brief, careful explanation that omitted the more concerning details of the mysterious note. Clara, perceptive as always, had clearly suspected more than they revealed, but asked no questions, simply promising to keep Finn and Nora safe until their return. Now, as they drew closer to the crossing, Kalen surveyed the terrain with the practiced eye of a veteran scout. Despite his weakened condition, his senses remained sharp, attuned to the subtle signs that might betray an enemy's position. "There," he murmured, nodding toward a copse of cottonwoods on the far bank. "Someone's waiting." Mara followed his gaze, but saw nothing beyond the trees themselves, their leaves shimmering silver in the early light. "How can you tell?" "Bird patterns," he explained. "They're avoiding that area, but flying normally everywhere else." They approached cautiously, Kalen leading their horses off the main trail to minimize their exposure. When they reached the near bank of the creek, he raised his hand to halt. "Whoever's there, show yourself," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the water. "We came as requested." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the brush parted, and a figure emerged from the cottonwoods. An elderly man with weathered features and silver hair leaning heavily on a carved walking stick. He wore the simple clothing of a rancher, not the attire of a gunman or hired killer. "Captain Voss." The man acknowledged, his voice surprisingly strong despite his apparent age. "And Mrs. Lark, thank you for coming." "Who are you?" Kalen demanded, scanning the area for signs of others. He could detect no one else nearby, but caution remained his watchword. "My name is Thomas Lark," the old man replied. "John and Roy's father." The revelation struck like a physical blow. The Lark patriarch had been absent from Silver Creek for so long that many believed him dead. Yet here he stood, seemingly materializing from nowhere, just when the Lark dynasty had apparently ended. "What do you want?" Mara asked, her voice steady, despite the tension evident in her posture. Thomas Lark studied her for a long moment. "To see you. To see the child." "Why?" Kalen pressed, moving slightly to position himself between Mara and the old man. "Because she's my granddaughter," Lark replied simply. "The last of my bloodline." Mara's breath caught. "How did you know?" The old man's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "John wrote to me before he died. Told me about a woman in Boston. Said she was carrying his child." His eyes remarkably sharp despite his age fixed on Mara. "He loved you, you know, in his way." "His way wasn't love," Mara responded coldly. "I learned that too late." Thomas Lark nodded slowly, accepting her assessment without argument. "John changed after the war. They all did. Came back harder, crueler." His gaze shifted to Kalen. "You saw it. You fought it." "Is that why you sent for us?" Kalen asked. "To reminisce about your sons?" "No." Lark gestured toward a fallen log near the water's edge. "May we sit? These old legs don't stand as well as they used to." After a moment's hesitation, Kalen nodded. They crossed the shallow creek horses, picking their way carefully across the rocky bottom. Thomas Lark lowered himself to the log with the careful movements of a man well acquainted with pain, his walking stick braced against the ground for support. "I've been watching," he began, once they were seated, a cautious distance from him. "From a distance, for years. Watched my boys turn the Lark name into something ugly, something feared instead of respected." "Why didn't you stop them?" Mara asked, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Lark's expression hardened. "I tried. After John died, I confronted Roy about the smuggling, about the way he was running things." He looked down at his gnarled hands. "He had me beaten, my own son. Said if I ever interfered again, he'd have me killed." "So you disappeared," Kalen surmised. "Retreated," Lark corrected. "To a small cabin in the high country. Kept my ears open. Maintained connections with a few old friends who fed me information." His eyes moved between them. "I knew when Catherine arrived. Knew when she fled. Knew when you took her in captain." "And you did nothing," Mara stated flatly. The old man met her gaze directly. "Would you have trusted help from anyone named Lark after what Roy did to you?" The question hung in the air unanswerable, because the truth in it was self-evident. "Why come forward now?" Kalen asked after a moment. "With your sons dead and the Lark Empire dismantled." "Because of the child," Thomas replied, his voice softening. "Nora, John's daughter, my granddaughter." He straightened slightly. "I'm dying, Captain Voss. Consumption, won't see another winter. Before I go, I needed to know she'd be taken care of. That she'd have a future." "She will," Mara assured him, her initial hostility tempered by the old man's evident frailty. "We'll make sure of that." Thomas nodded, apparently satisfied. "I believe you will. That's why I've made certain arrangements." He reached inside his coat, moving slowly to avoid alarming Kalen, and withdrew a folded document. "This is for her. For Nora." Kalen accepted the paper, cautiously unfolding it to reveal a legal document bearing official seals. As he scanned its contents, his expression changed from suspicion to surprise. This is a deed," he said, looking up at the old man. "For the original Lark homestead, 300 acres along the western ridge. Land that's been in our family since before the war," Thomas confirmed, "separate from the ranch proper, never part of the mining operations or smuggling routes." clean land. His rheumy eyes held Kalen's gaze. Land that rightfully belongs to my granddaughter. Why give this to us? Kalen asked, still suspicious of motives that seemed too straightforward, too generous. Not to you, Thomas corrected. To Nora. You're just the custodians until she's of age. He smiled faintly. Though I suspect you'll make good use of it in the meantime. Mara studied the old man carefully. There's more to this than generosity, isn't there? Thomas Lark chuckled a dry sound like autumn leaves skittering across stone. Sharp, just as John described. He nodded slowly. Yes, there's more. The original Lark fortune gold from the first strikes before the silver mines is buried on that land. My father's cash, hidden during the war for safekeeping. John and Roy never knew its location. I never told them because I saw the greed growing in them, even as boys. Kalen and Mara exchanged startled glances. The implications were staggering, not just land, but potentially a significant fortune, all deeded to a child barely 4 months old. Why tell us this? Kalen asked. Why not take the secret to your grave? Because secrets have power only in darkness, Thomas replied. And I'm tired of darkness, tired of what it did to my family. He leaned forward, suddenly intent. But understand this, I'm not giving you this information out of charity. I want something in return. What? Mara asked warily. A promise that you'll raise Nora to know who she is, a Lark by blood, yes, but not defined by the sins of her father or uncle. That you'll tell her about me someday. Not the monster my sons became, but the man I tried to be. The request was unexpected in its simplicity and its poignancy. Not money or power or vengeance, but remembrance, legacy. We can promise that, Mara said softly, after a glance at Kalen confirmed his agreement. She'll know the truth, all of it, when she's old enough to understand. Relief washed over Thomas Lark's weathered features. Thank you. He reached into his coat again, this time producing a small leather pouch. This contains the map to the cache along with my personal journal. For Nora, when the time comes. As Kalen accepted the pouch, Thomas struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his walking stick. One last thing, Captain Voss, about the Lark Ranch. What about it? Don't let it go to strangers, the old man urged. Whatever you think of my family, that land has been part of this territory's story from the beginning. Should stay with someone who understands its history, its meaning. Before Kalen could respond, Thomas turned to Mara. May I ask one more favor? Would you describe her to me, Nora? What she looks like, her nature. The request, made with such naked longing, stripped away the last of Mara's reservations. This was not the calculated manipulation of a Lark scheme, but the simple desire of an old man to know something of his only grandchild before death claimed him. She has John's eyes, Mara began softly, that clear blue like morning sky, but her smile that's all her own. She laughs easily even now. Strong-willed already, doesn't give up when she wants something. As she continued describing Nora's emerging personality, Thomas Lark listened with rapt attention, occasionally nodding, as if confirming traits recognized from generations past. When Mara finally fell silent, the old man's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Thank you, he said simply. That's worth more than all the gold we ever pulled from these hills. He straightened his bent frame as much as his failing health allowed, assuming a dignity that hinted at the man he had once been. I won't trouble you again. What needed saying has been said. He gestured toward the deed Kalen still held. that's properly filed with the Territorial Land Office. No one can contest it. The homestead is Nora's free and clear. With that, he turned and began making his slow way back toward the cottonwoods. After a few steps, he paused and looked back. Be good to her, Captain. Be the father John never had the chance to be. I will. Kalen promised, the words coming easily because they were already true in his heart. Thomas Lark nodded once more, then disappeared among the trees as silently as he had emerged, leaving Kalen and Mara to contemplate the unexpected turn their journey had taken. Do you believe him? Mara asked as they mounted their horses for the ride back to town. About the gold? I believe he believes it, Kalen replied carefully. Whether it's still there after all these years, that's another question. And his request about Nora, about telling her the truth someday, Kalen considered this as they rode the rising sun warming their backs. The truth is never simple, he said finally, but she deserves to know where she came from. All of it, the good and the bad. Mara nodded, relieved by his answer. And the other thing he mentioned about the Lark Ranch. Will you bid on it now? I think I will, Kalen decided. Not for the Lark name or legacy, but for what it could become. What we could build there together. The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Together. A family forged, not through blood, but through choice and circumstance and love that had grown where none had been planted. Silver Creek transformed rapidly in the months that followed. With the Lark criminal enterprise dismantled and their political allies removed from power, the town experienced a renaissance of sorts. New businesses opened. Settlers who had avoided the area due to the Lark's reputation began arriving, and a general atmosphere of optimism replaced the former cloud of fear and suspicion. Kalen's bid for the Lark Ranch was successful thanks partly to Judge Thorne's influence and partly to the unexpected support of several townspeople who spoke in his favor at the auction. The transition wasn't without challenges. Some of the former Lark hands initially resisted working under the man who had brought down their previous employers, but Kalen's fair treatment and clear vision for the future gradually won over all but the most dedicated Lark loyalists. The original Lark homestead, now legally Nora's inheritance, proved to be exactly as Thomas had described: pristine land with excellent water rights, untouched by the mining operations that had scarred much of the surrounding territory. Kalen hired a crew to repair the long-abandoned main house, transforming it into a comfortable home for what was now, in all but legal formality, his family. And as for Thomas Lark's claim about buried gold, that too proved true. Following the crude map included in the old man's journal, Kalen discovered a carefully concealed cellar beneath the original homestead's barn, containing strongboxes filled with gold coins and bars dating back to the first Colorado strikes. The fortune, while not as vast as legend might have suggested, was nevertheless substantial enough to secure Nora's future and help establish the new ranching operation on solid financial footing. Thomas Lark himself was never seen again. Word reached them in late autumn that an elderly man fitting his description had died peacefully in a remote cabin high in the mountain. By the time authorities investigated, the body had been buried by the cabin's caretaker, an old Ute scout, who claimed the deceased had left specific instructions to be laid to rest on the mountain facing the sunrise. Whether this was truly Thomas Lark remained unconfirmed, but Kalen and Mara chose to believe it was, finding comfort in the thought that the old man had found his peace at last. Sheriff Morgan resumed his duties with renewed vigor, instituting reforms to ensure that no single family could ever again wield the kind of unchecked power the Larks had enjoyed. Judge Thorne, impressed by Morgan's integrity, recommended him for appointment as territorial marshal, a position that would allow him to help reshape law enforcement throughout the region. 6 months after their return to Silver Creek, on a crisp autumn day, with leaves turning gold across the valley, Kaylin and Mara were married in a simple ceremony at the newly rebuilt church. Finn stood proudly beside his father, while Clara Morgan held Nora, now a chubby, laughing infant whose eyes, so like John Lark's in color, nevertheless held none of her father's coldness. Judge Thorne himself traveled from Denver to officiate, bringing with him adoption papers that would legally make Nora a Voss, while preserving her birth identity and inheritance rights as outlined in Thomas Lark's deed. It was a careful balance of honoring the past while securing the future, a theme that seemed to define their new life together. After the ceremony, as friends and neighbors celebrated at the ranch that had once been the center of the Lark Empire, Kaylin found a quiet moment alone with his new wife on the wide porch overlooking the valley. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arm around her waist, as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Not a single one," Mara replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed in less than a year. From that night in the snowstorm to this." She gestured toward the gathering where Finn was solemnly showing Nora to admiring guests his pride in his sister, evident in every careful movement. "Life turns on small moments," Kaylin observed. "A knock on a door in a snowstorm, a decision to help rather than turn away. A gunshot that missed its mark by inches," she added, her hand gently touching his chest, where the scar from Roy's bullet remained a permanent reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. "I've been thinking about something Thomas Lark said," Kaylin mused after a comfortable silence, "about Nora knowing the truth someday. About who she is." "And who is she?" Mara asked softly. Kaylin's gaze moved from the distant mountains to the celebration before them, to Finn and Nora, to the land that stretched out in all directions, land that had once represented fear and conflict, but now promised a future of peace and prosperity. "She's a Lark by birth," he said finally, "but she's a Voss by choice, by love, just like her mother." He turned to face Mara fully. "Just like all of us. We're not defined by blood or birth or the names we carry. We're defined by the choices we make, the people we protect, the legacy we build." Mara's eyes glistened with tears as she reached up to touch his face. "When did the stoic Captain Voss become so philosophical? When a desperate woman with a baby changed everything I thought I knew about family," he replied with a rare smile. From inside came the sound of Finn calling for them, something about cutting the cake Mrs. Halverton had insisted on baking for the occasion. As they turned to rejoin their guests, their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of those who had faced death together and chosen life instead. "Captain and Mrs. Voss," Judge Thorne announced, as they entered, raising his glass in a toast that was immediately echoed by all present. "May your family prosper in peace for generations to come." The words seemed to fill the room with promise, not just for them, but for Silver Creek itself. As Kaylin looked around at the gathering former enemies, now cautious allies, strangers become friends, orphans become family, he recognized the truth that had been forged through blood and sacrifice and love. Redemption was possible even in the harshest wilderness, even for those who believed themselves beyond saving. And when Finn brought Nora to them, the four Vosses stood together for the first time as a legal family, united not by the circumstances that had brought them together, but by the choice to remain so, come what may. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Kaylin and Mara stood once more on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. The future stretched before them, no longer shadowed by fear, but bright with possibility. "What happens now?" Mara asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "Now," Kalen replied, his arm drawing her closer. "We live." Epilogue. 5 years later. The summer sun beat down on the valley, turning the grass golden and the creek shallow. From his position on the ridge, Kalen watched as Finn, now 13 and tall for his age, patiently taught 5-year-old Nora to handle her first pony. The girl's delighted laughter carried up the slope, a sound that never failed to warm him, even after all this time. "They're doing well," Mara observed, joining him on the ridgeline. At 30, motherhood and frontier life had added character to her beauty. Slight lines around her eyes, from squinting into western sun's, hands toughened by work, but still gentle when needed. "Finn's a good teacher," Kalen agreed, "patient, like his mother." Mara smiled at the compliment. Sarah would be proud of him, of the man he's becoming. "She would," Kalen agreed, no longer finding pain in the memory of his first wife. Time and love had transformed grief into gratitude for what had been and what now was. They stood in companionable silence, surveying the ranch that had flourished under their stewardship. The Voss holdings now encompassed the original homestead, the main Lark Ranch, and Nora's inheritance land, one of the largest operations in the territory, managed with a fairness and integrity that had made the Voss name synonymous with honor rather than fear. "Sheriff Morgan's rider brought news from Denver," Mara said after a while. "Judge Thorne is retiring. They're offering the position to James." "He deserves it," Kalen replied. "No man has done more to bring law to this territory." "He asked if you'd consider taking his place as sheriff." Kalen raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Did he now?" "He says Silver Creek needs someone the people trust. Someone with moral authority." She glanced at him sidelong. "Someone who knows the difference between law and justice." "I'm a rancher, not a lawman," Kalen protested mildly, though she could tell the idea had caught his interest. "You're whatever you choose to be," Mara countered. "Isn't that what you told Nora just last week when she insisted girls couldn't be cowboys?" Kalen chuckled at the memory of his daughter's determined declaration that she would be the first cowgirl in Colorado. "Using my own words against me, Mrs. Voss, one of the privileges of marriage," she replied with a smile. From below came a whoop of triumph as Nora successfully guided her pony through a simple figure-8 pattern Finn had laid out. The girl's dark hair streamed behind her, her face alight with accomplishment. "She has your spirit," Kalen observed. "Fearless. And your stubbornness," Mara added. "Once she sets her mind to something." They shared a smile of parental pride mixed with the wry acknowledgement of the challenges that same determination would bring in years to come. "I'll think about Morgan's offer," Kalen promised, turning his attention back to the matter at hand. "But whatever I decide, this family comes first." Mara nodded, understanding completely. After all they had endured to build this life together, its protection would always be their highest priority. As they descended the ridge to join their children, Kalen paused to survey the valley once more. The land that had witnessed so much bloodshed and betrayal now bore the fruits of peace and honest labor. The Lark legacy of fear had been replaced by the Voss tradition of fairness. And a child born of one family's darkness was growing strong in another's light. In the end, that was the truest redemption of all. End of the gunman's redemption.